Chapter 1152. Listening to the long sound of the horn coming from behind the mist, Brando let out a long sigh. He didn't say anything. He just turned around silently, leaving the long sound of the horn behind him, and walked down the dune. Malucha also turned his head to take a look. Then he strode forward to catch up. Behind him, Faith finally shut her mouth. White Mist looked at the little guy in surprise. She wondered what kind of power could make a fairy become silent. "Will we go back?" Faith asked. "Maybe." White Mist was stunned for a moment, and finally understood what the little guy was worried about. But after today, everything may change beyond recognition. If we can defeat the Twilight Dragon, when we return to the shallow sea, what we see may not be what we see today. Time never turns back. "If you leave your hometown, you will never be able to go back," Malucha said emotionally. He remembered the time when he left the shallow sea. When he returned after thousands of years, the people he saw were no longer the familiar faces. Sigh. Faith sighed. Even the usually optimistic little fairy was a little sad. For a moment, the atmosphere of the whole team was a little gloomy. But fortunately, she quickly recovered and threw her previous melancholy to the back of her mind. "But we will always make a lot of new friends, won't we?" Lute, who was sitting on Brando's shoulder, looked at her like she was an idiot. "Speaking of which, why did you think of this?" White Mist asked Faith curiously. In her opinion, this little fairy was a heartless character. It was rare to see her focus on something. "I miss Miss Tata a little," Faith thought for a moment, then answered seriously. "Miss Tata?" White Mist was surprised. "Madame Tilius, do you like her a lot?" "That's not it." Faith shook her head like a rattledrum. "I just feel a little close to her, like she's a twin born from the same seed as me. You humans don't know this feeling very well. For example, I feel like she's my elder sister." "I am not a human." White Mist corrected her. But Malucha almost lost his footing. He paused for a moment before continuing to walk forward. Brando, who had been silent all this time, turned to look at his summoned creature and gave it an encouraging look. Only then did the latter feel a little better. Brando knew that Malucha must have thought of Miss Tata's sister again, that fairy called Rose. Some memories were so profound that you would never be able to forget them, whether it was before or after death. At this moment, he couldn't help but think of some distant memories. It was still in the forest of Bucci. The bonfire that was dancing was the gaze of a true knight. Although it had died a long time ago, it had never let go of its obsession with its motherland. It wasn't until a very long time later that this obsession turned into a painful torment that gnawed at its soul day and night. It turned into a sword and protected a kingdom. He also thought of the experience of fighting side by side with everyone in the Amber Sword. It was a journey of laughter, sadness, achievement mixed with tears. The ending wasn't perfect, but it wasn't completely useless. At least this dream reappeared in his heart, making it no longer seem like a simple game. And he was considered lucky compared to Abdon. He was able to be in a dream, or perhaps it was his own dream. Brando sometimes wondered if he had died. His experience at this moment was just to make up for the regrets in his heart. But he was able to regain everything he had lost in this dream. He changed the fate of many people and prevented many destined tragedies from happening again. Although Won's history was falling apart before his eyes, becoming unfamiliar and unreachable, and even the entire world was on the verge of collapse and was about to fall into an irreversible fate of destruction. But strangely, this time he didn't feel much regret in his heart. Because he did his best and left no regrets. Whether it was Erwin, Princess Griffin, Freya, Scarlet, Medisha, or the Roman, the merchant lady, his fiancée. He looked at the road in front of him. It was a grey road that was completely different from the land of Wonde. At the end of this road, he thought that perhaps it was the end of his dream. Whether it was to save the Roman or to be destroyed with this world, he didn't have much regret in his heart. He thought that perhaps this was the end of a distant memory. At the end of everything, it was the eternal silence and the end. But this time, there were many people with him. It wasn't just Miss Tata and the Termosian people. He saw many people's faces from the same gaze. Those people were Black Tea, Pulley, Shadow, and his former comrades in The Amber Sword. He felt as if everyone came to his side. And this time, there was also a senior accompanying him. Just like the final battle in the Crimson Valley. He still remembered the cold rain at that time. Lute, Brando suddenly asked, "Where is the fire scepter?" Lute sat on his shoulder, turned his head to look at Brando's side face, shook his head and said, "It is in the Mountain of Quenching Storm, right here." Miss Tata said that there is no concept of space in the Mountain of Quenching Storm. Where we can go here depends on where we want to go. The yearning in our hearts is like a bridge, connecting each other's arrival. In other words, Brando said, the fire fairies only know that it is here, but no one knows where it is. Only when it wants to see us can we find it. To put it simply, it was to leave it for the fated person. Brendel knew that the Amber Sword liked to do this kind of thing, and he hated it. But Lute shook his head seriously. He replied with certainty, "No, you will definitely find the fire scepter." Why? Because Miss Tata and I both believe in this. You should also believe that you can do it, Mr. Brando. If you can't do it, then there is no hope in this world. Brando did not agree with this statement. Although he was not a doctrinaire materialist, sometimes he would prefer to believe in the former. Subjective initiative was important, but some objective facts would not change because of one's will. Of course I believe in it, but this may not solve the problem. Brando replied, "We can't just walk aimlessly here, right? Although I have no doubt about your and Miss Tata's vision, it doesn't change the fact that we still don't know how to find the fire scepter, right?" He thought he was being straightforward enough, but he did not expect Lute to be stubborn beyond his imagination. The blessed of Forsyth shook his head firmly and said, "Sometimes, if you want to, then you will definitely find it. This is the Mountain of Quenching Storm. If you still retain the logic of the earth, then it will not work." He's right, Brando. At this time, White Mist also stopped the meaningless conversation with Fias. She turned to Brando and said, "This is outside of the elemental plane. It is the world of spirit and will. You must understand this. Try to abandon some common sense and strengthen your belief." Then what should I do? Brando could not ignore White Mist's advice. "As I said, believe that you can find it. Strengthen your belief, Mr. Brando." Lute replied, "This is actually very simple. You just have to let go of the absurdity in your heart. And this experience will be very useful for you. The extreme plane is to abandon some common sense of wound and integrate into the essence of the world. In the world of laws, will and spirit are the most important." White Mist added. Brendel furrowed his brows. No matter how he said it, he really did not know where to start. It was like a person who was used to walking normally and could not get used to walking backwards, let alone running. Lute said to strengthen his belief and let go of the absurdity in his heart. Then what should he do? Should he just say in his heart, "Scepter of fire, quickly appear. I will definitely find you," and that would be enough? That would be a little too ridiculous. Brando's heart was filled with this somewhat irritating thought. But just as he was about to say it in his heart, he suddenly opened his mouth in shock. All of a sudden, he saw a towering mountain peak appear behind the fog. He could point to the heavens and swear in the name of Martha and all the gods and Buddhas that a second ago, there was definitely no such mountain in front of them. Brando was a little shocked. This kind of thing completely overturned his common sense. They were clearly in the gray stone wilderness, which was very close to the shallow gray bay. He still remembered that when he had just walked down from the nearby cliff headland, there was a low, uneven wilderness in front of him. That's right, the shallow gray bay. Brando hurriedly turned his head and found that the shallow gray bay was still behind him. Behind the mist, he could even see the long white trails left behind by the Termosian fleet disappearing on the surface of the sea. But when he turned his head again, his eyes could not help but widen even more. Because in front of him was no longer a towering mountain. To be precise, it was a mountain range. The shadows of the mountains overlapped with each other, stretching and undulating, forming a high gray wall. Even without being reminded, Brando knew that it was the mountain of stopping the storm. The sacred mountain of the wind elemental plane. And in front of him, on the tallest mountain peak, lightning surrounded it. Between the clouds and the top of the mountain, there seemed to be something like an extremely magnificent building complex. What is this? Brando could not help but ask Prince Lute on his shoulder, how did this come about? You really did it, Flaming Blade's adorer. Lute was also very excited. His golden eyes seemed to be lit up. He clenched his fists and said excitedly, that is the sacred mountain. Sacred mountain. What sacred mountain? Chapter 1153. The Prime Material Realm. At the same time as Rushta, only a few seconds had passed on the clock. Hippamra stood in the ruins near the 12th moon square for a moment before turning to leave. At that moment, the will of the mountains and rivers in her hands suddenly vibrated, followed by a second vibration. Hippamra was stunned for a moment. She lifted the cross warhammer with both hands and saw the sacred relic emitting a soft white light as it flew up from her hand and floated in the air. St. Cantifer Palace, Garden of the White Rose. Ha! Medusa suddenly stopped and looked around with a surprised expression. She frowned and showed a trace of unease. What's wrong? The Shire noticed her unusual behavior and asked. Nothing, his lordship is. Medusa looked at the empty stag and sprite slots in her deck and felt empty. Why is his lordship not back yet? Why didn't he say anything just now? The Garden of the White Rose was in a state of chaos. Old Prime Minister Nydivan and Archseigneur Vala had already activated the long-distance teleportation circle that originally belonged to the Kurlutz royal family. It was actually a small door of flame, but this action had instead aroused fear in the hearts of the people. The news spread like wildfire, and carriages came and went outside the palace gates. A few of them even drove directly into the White Rose Garden. No one cared about the majesty of the royal family at all. It was as if doomsday had arrived. There was a limit to the number of people that could be teleported each time. The nobles lined up according to their ranks. The first to be teleported were the nobles that Brando had rescued from the Flowerleaf Domain, East Metz, and other places. Then, there were the few remaining members of the royal family of Cruz, the House of Nydivan, and some of the clergy of the Holy Cathedral. Vahina wanted to stay and wait for Brando's return, but Medusa persuaded her to leave. Only Medusa, the Shire, and Scarlet were left in Brando's entourage. But even they had to leave in the next few teleportations because Rushta had become extremely unsafe. People gazed uneasily at the golden threads that fell to the ground outside the arched windows. It was as if a golden rain had fallen under the night sky, but the earth was shaking and letting out a dying roar. Where is Miss Magadol? Is the envoy from the Antiburo Principality not here yet? Someone in the crowd shouted anxiously, repeating the question over and over again. An official dressed like a foreign affairs minister ran through the crowd, repeatedly confirming the identities of the envoys from the other countries. Although Rushta might not be able to escape, the empire would not fall because of this. If the envoys from the other countries who were gathered here were killed because of their negligence, the empire's prestige would fall apart. But time was running out, and there was still no sign of Antiburo and the envoys from the Duchy of Insignia. The latter was fine, but the former included the nun Princess Magadol, and she could not afford to lose her. A few clerics belonging to the Holy Cathedral had already rushed out of St. Cantifer Palace and got on the carriage, heading towards the street where the Antibureau Principality was staying. In the darkness, a tall silhouette stood by one of the arched windows of the palace, leaning against the long curtains that hung from the window lattice to the ground, quietly watching the scene. She was the only direct member of the House of Nydivan who did not leave. To be exact, she was the only one who did not participate in the teleportation. Delphian did not know why she did this. She was a calm person, or rather, she thought that she should be calm and rational. She should not act without thinking and do something impulsive. But she could not find a reason for her actions. She seemed to have thousands of thoughts in her mind. Sometimes she told herself that she just wanted to calm down for a while. After all, as the granddaughter of Prime Minister Nydivan, a member of the House of Nydivan, she could leave at any time. But sometimes she told herself that she just wanted to see if that person could come back. Even if she had to die with that person, it was enough for her to get what she wanted. But what frightened the Prime Minister's daughter was that she clearly heard a voice in her heart telling her, "It's not like this, it's not like this." The scene of Brendel standing proudly before the entire empire in the Garden of White Roses appeared in her mind more than once. Everything that she pursued and valued was completely destroyed. Even though she knew that Brendel was not targeting her, she still felt like she was stripped naked and standing in front of everyone. She was so pitiful that she felt like a clown. Delphian recalled all of this, but her heart throbbed. Why is it like this? Did I make a wrong judgment? She did not say a word, and her face was terrifyingly cold. A few young nobles who wanted to approach her stopped in their tracks. There were fewer and fewer people in the palace. Groups of people passed by her, and groups of people left one after another. Until a royal steward came up to remind her that she had to leave. But Delphian did not seem to hear. The steward wanted to say something, but suddenly, a buzzing sound came from behind them. The crowd was in an uproar. The two of them instinctively turned their heads and saw the crowd in the Garden of the White Roses banquet hall disperse, revealing Countess Val-Lach in the middle. Scarlet was looking at the azure spear in her hand in surprise. She saw the holy spear of heaven vibrate slightly, glowing all over. It broke free from her hand and gradually floated in the air. "Ovina, what's going on?" she asked in surprise. The spear spirit of the holy spear had already shown herself. She floated beside the Highlander girl and looked up at the azure spear in the air. Her emerald eyes were filled with shock. "The Holy Cathedral has reappeared, Scarlet." "What?" "The majestic mountain Holy Cathedral has reappeared. The King of the Earth has been born." "Does this have anything to do with the Lord?" Scarlet thought for a moment, and asked with concern. Ovino looked at her and could not help but sigh. This silly girl had completely fallen for it. To be honest, as a follower of the Azure Knight, she admired masters who were more independent. But there were certain qualities in Scarlet that truly moved her. After all, the two of them were different. If the Azure Knight was a pioneer, then Scarlet was at most a qualified successor. But not every era needed an Azure Knight. The innocent girl in front of her was clearly the most compatible master of the Azure Spear in this era. She shook her head, and then nodded. "I don't know, but I think it might be related. Hurry up and hold on to the Holy Spear. If you can't get the Azure Spear's approval now, it will return to the place where it was born, but... What should I do?" "Hold on to this spear. You are the Azure Knight. But don't bind its will. The will of the earth will eventually submit to the king. Avoid the crowd. It will open a door to the mountain of ceasing storms. Don't hurt anyone else." Scarlet nodded and flew into the air. Everyone in the hall watched the newly conferred countess. When she grabbed the Azure Spear's handle, she felt a slight tremor in her hand. This is, south of the Empire, Enzlova region. There were very few people in the highlands and lowlands. From the lone port to Vargas, there was almost no order. Since a month ago, when the Allied forces of Jorgandi Ridge and the Toquenin Lion men were defeated in the north of the Evergreen Corridor, the defeated soldiers retreated and fled to some areas southeast of the Sublime Inland Sea in the south, causing the security here to deteriorate. The natives of Jorgandi Ridge, some troglodytes, lizard men, and bugbears, were entrenched in the countryside, doing what they did in the underground world, robbing. A few underground lords occupied towns and ruins, but just like their rule in the underground world, they did not care about the wilderness. Other than the area occupied by the Medusi, which still had some characteristics of civilization and order, most of Enslova had returned to the wilderness. These places took humans and elves hundreds of years to build in the Year of Glory, but the war took less than 2 months to completely destroy everything. A fleet was slowly sailing above the clouds. Like a shadow hanging above the clouds, the sails of the fleet were densely packed like fish scales, sparkling in the night sky. The residents of Enslova hid in the forest and ruins, watching this strange scene. Then, most of them carefully shrank back. They knew that this was the humans' floating fleet. If it were a month ago, this fleet would probably have been attacked by hordes of dragons. But at this time, all the glory was long gone. Not to mention that the White Legion, which had been incorporated by the eldest prince, could come south at any time through the Evergreen Corridor. Even the Red Legion in the wilderness of the Four Territories could attack from the east at any time. No one knew how long they could stay on this land. The fleet passed over the Enslova region and was immediately attacked by a falling meteor. A golden line passed through the fleet, causing 2 or 3 warships to catch fire. The meteor eventually hit Bear Lake, completely erasing the lake from the Empire's territory. It also vaporized thousands of troglodytes and bandits nearby. But the fleet was also affected. They had no choice but to descend from the clouds and land in the nearby hills. The 3-masted Everton airship landed in a small valley. A group of people immediately disembarked, passed through the nearby forest, and occupied a high point outside the valley. Knight escorted a young man and a snake-haired woman out of the forest and looked at the nearby hills. Warships were descending in the night sky, densely packed, like clouds hanging down from the sky. Haru's gaze was on the alluvial plains in the distance. Back then, he and his teacher had taken this path to avoid the pursuit of Jorgandi Ridge's army to Lone Harbor. At the end of their vision was Vargas. Thinking back, it felt like yesterday. On the pitch-black horizon, there were a few sparks of light. Other than that, the entire land seemed to have fallen into a deep slumber. The young prince knew that those sparks were probably the lizardmen's tribes, and the Empire's lights had long since been extinguished. He could not help but feel a little sad. He still remembered that when he came here, the night here was still very bright. The plains were filled with the lights of the towns. Chapter 1154. How nice it would be if there was no war. Haruz could not help but whisper, his silver eyes quietly reflecting the golden light hanging from the sky. Although the young prince did not know what it was, he instinctively felt that it might have something to do with his teacher. Miss Lismika, the black moon is broken. What is this sign of? Medusa seemed to be thinking about her own matters and did not respond for a while. She looked at the wilderness, and the dark earth seemed to symbolize the uninhabited land. Looking out from the hills, only deserted fields could be seen. A windmill stood alone on a distant hill, reflecting the blazing fire in the Bear Lake area. The leaf fan of the windmill had long rotted away, leaving only a bare frame, which had been torn down in half by someone. It was hard to believe that this was once one of the most agricultural and prosperous areas of the empire. It supported the food consumption of Cloak Bay and Anzaruda. Now the roads to and from various places had been cut off, and commercial and trade activities had long since come to a standstill. There was no telling what kind of famine would happen in the empire this year. Lismike could not help but think of her hometown. In the eyes of the underground people, the beauty there was no less than here, but it was now gone. Miss Lasmika. What's the matter with you? Hearse looked at her with some confusion. He had never seen Medusa so distracted. Sorry, Lasmika suddenly realized. She pressed the scales on her forehead and said, I was distracted. What are you thinking about? Hearse asked. I'm thinking about the dark elves. Lasmika lied. But it was not a complete lie. Around the middle of autumn, a clan of dark elves came to the surface and established their own territory far away from Medusa's territory. They brought long-awaited news from the underground world to the underground residents of the surface world. The demons had crossed the ash tip and began to attack the area above the beehive. Although Valhalla's fleet sailed in the sky, when they were not performing the teleportation jump, they still sent people to the ground every day to collect information about the nearby areas. One was to confirm possible enemy information, and the other was to replenish food and water. Of course, in a barren place like Enzlova, the former was more of a factor. The fleet had already inquired about the dark elves that Lysimika mentioned a few days ago. Others only treated it as a topic of conversation, but it was of great significance to Lysimika. Are you homesick, Lasmika? Hearse asked in a low voice. I don't have a home, Your Highness. Hearse looked at her curiously. Lysimika sighed and explained, I was once a slave of a demon. People who are treated as slaves have no home. We were expelled from our homes and lost what we originally belonged to. Hearse was a little sad when he heard this and hurriedly said, Miss Lasmika, maybe you can ask teacher to help you. He once defeated those demons, so he must have a way. Hearse appeared to have full confidence in Brando. In his opinion, Brando was probably omnipotent, at least he had never let his student down. Lasmika glanced at the little prince and shook her head. She did have such an idea, but until today, the fall of the black moon meant the coming of dusk, and she understood that the demon's strange movements might have come from this. If it was the end of the world, the young man and the Bugas could not change all this. Thinking of this, she could not help but press the pendant of the necklace on her chest. But it was at this moment that the necklace vibrated slightly. Lasmika was horrified. She raised her head, her prismatic eyes staring at the dark woods not far away, and shouted in a low voice, Who's there? There was a low exclamation of surprise in the forest. Lasmika, is that you? Hearse did not know what was going on, and he could not help but look around. The knight in the woods behind noticed the movement here and drew his sword. Then he saw Miss Medusa next to him frozen in place as if she had been petrified. Kaya? Lasmika asked tentatively. There was a cheer from the forest. Then, a young girl holding a longbow and wearing a long cloak jumped down from the tree. Her hood was folded behind her neck, revealing a head of beautiful white hair and pointy ears under the moonlight. She was obviously an elf, but her body was much shorter than the average wind elf and silver elf. Her skin was dark, and the sides of her straight nose were slightly sunken. In her eye sockets were a pair of eyes that sparkled like rubies, making people subconsciously think of certain legendary vampires. But there was no doubt that the other party was not an undead, but a distant relative of the elves in the underground world, a dark elf. Hearse did not expect Lasmika to appear as soon as she mentioned these dark elves to him. And it seemed that this dark elf girl knew Miss Medusa beside him. The moment the dark elf girl Kaya saw Lasmika, she could not help but let out a cry of excitement. She threw away her longbow and rushed over, hugging Lasmika tightly. Miss Medusa hurriedly stopped the knight who was approaching from behind, and then hugged the little girl. She was also a little excited. She first held the other's face and looked at it carefully, then kissed the other's forehead according to the Medusa's etiquette. Hearse had been with her for a long time, and he knew that this etiquette was used by the Medusas to the people closest to them. He could not help but look at the dark elf girl with some curiosity. In some of the knowledge that Brando had taught him about Georgandy Ridge, the dark elves were independent, and this matriarchal society had nothing to do with the other residents of the underground. Lesmika and Kaya chattered in the underground language for a long time before Lesmika took the latter's hand to Hearse and introduced her to him. "Your Highness, this is Kaya. I met her in the demon slave camp. She has saved me several times. Sister Lysimika has also saved me several times," Kaya said, her pronunciation perfect. This dark elf girl actually knew the language of the ground, and her intonation was also very standard. "Greetings, Your Highness, human prince. Joksha is protecting you." Hearse knew that Joksha was the spider goddess, but she was also Martha. She was similar to the goddess of the dead moon that the undead believed in, but was actually just a side of order. "Hello, Miss Kaya." He nodded politely and then looked at Lady Medusa. Clearly, he had not figured out what was going on. Kaya brought news about the underground. Lesmika understood what the little prince's eyes meant and quickly explained, "Didn't you ask earlier what the fall of the black moon meant?" "Your Royal Highness, it means the awakening of dusk." "Ah." Hearse was startled. "Don't worry, Your Royal Highness," Miss Medusa waved her hand, indicating that the other party should not interrupt her. "But the Twilight Dragon seems to have lost contact with this world, and the demons are in civil strife because of this. All this happened 2 months ago, and Kaya and the others escaped at that time." 2 months ago, Hearse remembered something. "Wasn't that when we first met the Dragon Queen?" It was almost that time. The demons were still fighting each other until a few days ago, which means that something must have happened to the Twilight Dragon, Lesmika said with some excitement. "The black moon fell, but the Twilight Dragon did not appear. Maybe the rumor is true." "What rumor?" "It is that the Azure Knight completely defeated it. If it does not appear after the end of the demonic wave, the demons will retreat to the Sea of Chaos. Maybe we will have a chance to return to the Tip of Ashes." Miss Medusa's voice could not help but raise a few notches. She clenched her fists and her eyes sparkled. Hearse had never seen her like this. "Miss Kaya," he turned back and asked, "is what Lesmika said true, that the Twilight Dragon is dead?" Kaya shook her head blankly. "I don't know, but the demons have indeed begun to have civil strife. They stopped in front of the big hive and killed each other in Georgandy Ridge. We took this opportunity to escape." She thought for a moment and said, "Your Highness, my people and I have nowhere to go at the moment. I heard that the Empire may recover this place at any time. I heard from Sister Lysimika about you and your sister. I would like to beg you to take us in temporarily. We will definitely be able to help you." "Ah." Hearse was stunned. He knew that there must be more than 1 or 2 dark elves who escaped to the surface. Since they could be called a clan, there must be at least hundreds of them. Although the Dark Elves were a matriarchal society, they were brave and good at fighting. They not only had to compete with other races underground for territory, but also fought with the demons all year round. Their individual combat strength was in fact far superior to their relatives on the surface. These people were not only a force to be reckoned with, but they could also be trouble. His understanding of this race was limited to what Brando had told him, and he could not tell what their personalities were like. If these dark elves were aggressive, greedy, and ambitious, then wouldn't he be bringing back trouble for his sister? The little prince could not help but feel a little distressed for a moment, thinking that if only his teacher were here, he would be able to make a decision easily. "Your Royal Highness," Lesmika suddenly said, "promise her that the dark elves will not stay on the surface for long. When the demons retreat, we will return to Ash's Tip. But before that, we can help you and your sister a lot." Hearse frowned and rubbed his eyebrows. This action was very much like his sister's. If Brando were here, he might have mistakenly thought that he was looking at the little princess he saw in the dream. "Miss Kaya," he thought alone for a moment, imagining how Brando would deal with this problem if he were here, and then said, "Can you tell me more about the Twilight Dragon? What happened?" Heartwarming decided how to answer this question after confirming that the demons would retreat into the chaos. Kaya was stunned when she heard this question. She probably did not understand the connection between the two, but she reacted quickly and answered almost subconsciously. But this sentence was spoken too quickly and did not seem to be in the language of the surface, so Heartwarming did not understand it at all. Even though the little prince did not understand, Lasmika did. Her expression changed slightly, and she said subconsciously, "Impossible." Unexpectedly, Kaya did not obey her this time. The dark elf girl shook her head firmly and said something again. Because she was talking to Lasmika, she opened her mouth and said a series of words in the underground language. When Lasmika heard this, a look of shock appeared on her face. She subconsciously put her hand on her chest and felt the necklace around her neck vibrate slightly again. Then it suddenly began to glow and slowly rose from between the Medusa's snow-white cleavage. Kaya stared at the pendant with burning eyes, as if she had seen something sacred. Chapter 1155. Have you ever seen a lonely mountain? The mountain was as green as jade, and white clouds surrounded the lonely peak all year round. It was like a sharp sword, piercing straight into the clouds. Goshawks could only reach its mountainside, and the mountains could only be its background. Brando looked up at the lonely peak and was speechless for a long time. He thought that the mountains of the Loop of Trade Winds were majestic, and the mountains of Algash were steep, but they had to crawl and submit in front of this lonely peak, like a king. There was some natural scenery that could hit the heart and shock people, and this lonely peak was undoubtedly one of them. A long ladder hung down from the top of the mountain, and there were countless steps. Each step was paved with gray marble, and on both sides of the long ladder, there were also countless marble pillars. The long ladder connected to the group of temples on the top of the mountain, and it became thinner and thinner as it went up, and finally became a straight black line. Blessed of the flaming blade, now I'm starting to believe Miss Tilius's words. Lute flew up from Brendel's shoulder and muttered to himself as he looked at the majestic mountain. What? Brando looked at him in confusion. This is the throne of Himalud. Brando was stunned, and he looked at Lute in the air as if to confirm that the latter was not joking. Legend has it that Himalud placed her throne at the top of the mountain, and on this peak was the temple of Gaia, the goddess of the earth, and the hometown of Himalud's shepherdesses. Legend has it that it was located in the mountains to the north of the White Plains, but since the disappearance of the three sacred objects of the Temple of the Earth, this sacred mountain in the hearts of the Toquinen lion men and dwarves had disappeared for thousands of years. The fairy's face was very serious, and Brando realized that the other party was not joking. He then understood what Lute meant by the sacred mountain. That was the sacred mountain in the hearts of the Toquinen lion men and dwarves. But shouldn't it be in Wound? No, Lute shook his head. This mountain has always been here. Although it once appeared on the earth, it was a long time ago. Ever since the mortals lost the three holy objects, Himalud moved them back outside the elemental barrier in a fit of rage. It turned out that there was such a secret behind it. Brando finally understood. He stared at the palaces in the clouds and asked, "Is that the temple of the goddess Gaia? The flame scepter is here." "I don't know either." "You don't know either." Lute nodded seriously. "I only know that the flame scepter is in the mountain of quenching storms. Every chosen of Forsyth will come here on a pilgrimage. Only those recognized by the golden flame can decide the fate of the fire fairies. The fairy kings of each generation generally don't talk about their trial process, so most of the people of Forsyth don't know the specific location of the flame scepter. But, he continued, it's very likely to be here, up here." Brando looked up the stairs. The marble pillars on both sides of the stairs were engraved with ancient runes. This was a pilgrimage path. For thousands of years, the believers gently touched these pillars with their hands and walked up the stone stairs step by step, chanting sacred prayers until they reached the top of the mountain. His eyes looked far into the distance, as if he had crossed the river of time and saw scenes that belonged to that era. The shepherdesses wore holy robes and held shepherding staffs. They covered the stone steps with a thin layer of soil to symbolize that the people of the earth lived and prospered on the ground, passing down the teachings of the goddess from generation to generation. It was not until a long time later that Brando retracted his gaze. He took a step forward, but Lute stopped him and said, "Wait, do you know who the last person who summoned the sacred mountain was?" Brando stopped, looked at Lute, and replied, "Wasn't that your fire fairy?" "The last fire fairy king." Lute shook his head like a rattledrum. "That's not the same, I'm talking about mortals." "No. Perhaps they can't be considered as mortals." He looked at Brendel with a conflicted expression. "It should be someone like you. Someone like me, a planeswalker." "Maybe you can say that, but not exactly. It's more or less like you." "Do you know who it is?" Then, without waiting for Brando to answer, he continued, "The blessed of the flaming blade, the sacred mountain means something completely different to people like you. It's a trial." By this time, Brando had already guessed who Lute was talking about. "The lofty mountain trial, the night of the azure sky." Lute nodded, looked at him silently, and murmured, "Miss Tilius's prophecy may be true. The lofty mountain trial is just the beginning, but it's the highest standard." "You mean, that trial isn't the only one?" "Of course it's not the only one. It's a trial for those who recognize the 7 sacred objects. The previous dark dragons could only get the king's trial." "The previous dark dragons. They're candidates." Malurcha carried Fias and White Mist and followed. White Mist answered, but they might not be recognized. In earlier eras, they weren't the only ones. But regarding the content of the trial, Odin never mentioned it. No one, including the Witch Empress, knows. The little fairy seemed to be hesitating. He seemed to want to express something, but he couldn't say it. In the end, he said, "The blessed of the flaming blade, once you take this step, there's no turning back. There's danger. Danger you can't imagine." The Night of Azure Sky took 40 years to pass the lofty mountain trial and get the recognition of the mountains. He was on the verge of death several times. If it wasn't for his iron will, he wouldn't have been able to hold on. If he died in the trial, he would really die. "You're still too weak. The key is that no one can help you, not even your planeswalker ability." "Right, I might be able to travel with you. I'm also summoned by the Scepter of Flame." Brando looked up and glanced at the stairs that led to the sky. Then he turned around and said to the others behind him, "Wait for me here." As he spoke, he took a step forward without hesitation and stepped onto the first stone staircase of Himelad's throne. "Wait for me!" Lute shouted and rushed up. But just as he flew up the stairs, he found that he had lost sight of Brando. Brando found that the moment he landed, the stairs disappeared. The marble pillars on both sides of the stairs also disappeared. The sacred mountain disappeared, and the palaces on the mountain peak naturally disappeared as well. A gust of biting cold wind blew in his face, and only then did he realize that he was in the middle of a snow-covered mountain range. The wind whistled between the mountains, and the mountain peaks were like exposed rocks that were as sharp as blades. The sky was gloomy, as if it was cast in lead. When the second gust of cold wind whistled, Brando felt a bone-piercing chill. This chill seemed to be able to penetrate his tough skin and reach his bones and internal organs. It froze his blood that was flowing like molten steel after reaching the extreme state. His powerful strength seemed to have disappeared, and he shivered in the cold like an ordinary person. Although Brando knew that this was just an illusion, he only needed to open the system to know that his strength had not decreased, but had increased. The Termosian robe he was wearing had been replaced by a double-layered chainmail. Between the seams of the chainmail, there was a thick layer of mink fur on top of the chainmail. The inside of the chainmail was padded with thick velvet, and there was also a layer of silk on the inside. The inner layer of the metal gloves was filled with the best deerskin and velvet, and there was also a thick layer of soft metal underneath the iron gauntlets. He also had a long bearskin shawl and a cloak. The craftsmanship was enough to put any craftsman of Ampere Seal to shame. Brando didn't even need to confirm the name of this set of armor. It was Corell's Courage, the hero's armor, and it was also equipped with a cold protection kit. Each piece was carefully selected by him from the market. Although it couldn't be compared to the magic kits that the rich used, it was at least the best of the best. He raised the sword in his hand. He didn't need to look at it. Just from the feel of the metal gloves, he could tell that it was an authentic Grecian sword. It was a two-handed greatsword. During combat, one would even need to hold the blade in one hand and the hilt in the other. The metal gloves were prepared for this purpose. This sword was called Engraved Spirit, one of the nemeses of the undead. This was the equipment he used in the last battle in the Al-Kash Mountains. Except for the items that he had prepared in his backpack, he didn't miss even the slightest detail. The blood in his body formed a perfect cycle, surging endlessly. Every inch of his muscles was like a sculpture. Every breath he took was long and powerful. The domain around his body had disappeared, and in its place was law and order that seemed to have merged with the whole world. Brando turned the sword upside down and used his finger to gently cut the blade. A drop of silver blood flowed out of the wound, and it healed in an instant. He exhaled softly. Perfect body, silver body. This was his peak state in the game. But where was this place? Brando looked around and finally remembered that he was in a trial. But why did the legendary majestic mountain Tesh change his state to the last moment before he transmigrated to this world? He didn't know. Could it be that this trial was purely for the soul? Just as this thought appeared in his mind, another gust of cold wind hit him in the face. The biting cold of the north wind was like a knife hitting his face. It was so cold that he almost felt his skin cracking. He did not dare to touch his cheeks, for fear that there were already a few cuts there. In this extreme environment, before blood could flow out, it would freeze and scab. It was not impossible for him to accidentally tear off a piece of skin on his face. Chapter 1156. His silver body was like a piece of paper in this cold wind, and Brando finally understood why the Azure Knight had to go through so many life and death situations here. When he exhaled, the mist actually turned into ice shards that rustled down. Brando was shocked, and only then did he understand how terrifying the cold was. This was not a good place to stay for long, he immediately thought. He looked up and saw that he was on top of a glacier, and in front of him was a vast expanse of whiteness, as if it was a path. He looked back and saw that there was a bottomless abyss behind him. When he moved his feet slightly, countless ice shards rolled down until they disappeared. The abyss was pitch black, and it was impossible to see how deep it was. Brando shivered. Although he still did not understand the purpose of this trial, the most important thing was obviously to leave this damned place. He was not unfamiliar with similar trials. There had been such trials from the Limiter to the Sage Domain. Of course, the difficulty was not as high as this one. In theory, such trials were like a dream, but Lutz said that if he died in this dream, he would really die. Brando definitely did not want to test it and challenge whether it was real or fake. However, such trials usually had a clear goal, which was to complete a certain quest or kill a certain monster. However, it was rare for one to be thrown into an inexplicably harsh environment like this. What was the purpose of this trial? Was it purely to survive? Brando felt that it was not that simple. He thought back to the trial of the Azure Knight. There were too many legends about this legend, and it was even written into many poems that circulated in Woned. The contents of these poems were mostly similar, but the final result was that the Azure Knight was recognized by the mountains and obtained the Holy Lance of Heaven. So, was the purpose of this trial to find something? The Flame Scepter. Brando thought silently as he moved forward with difficulty in the glacier. Not long after, he felt that he was in trouble. The environment here was too harsh. The wind in the glacier was made up of some unknown law, and it was so cold that it made people shiver. His equipment were useless in the snow, and his silver body seemed to be useless. He had only walked less than a mile, and he felt like an ordinary person who was only wearing a thin layer of clothing trudging in a snowstorm. It might even be worse than that, because at least the snowstorm would not do anything to the soul. Brando quickly discovered that both his perception and willpower attributes were slowly decreasing. This discovery frightened him out of his wits. What the hell was this? He had never encountered a cold wind that could cause damage to his internal attributes before. Not to mention encountering it, he had never even imagined it before. Under the extremely low temperature, the metal quickly became brittle. Even the magic power attached to it could not protect it. The engraved spirit greatsword was the first to leave Brando. When he used it to support his body, the two-handed sword first broke into countless pieces with a crack. It almost made Brando fall into the snow. This almost made him break out in a cold sweat because he was not sure if he would have the strength to stand up again if he fell. But just as the cold sweat appeared, it immediately turned to frost, and his body temperature dropped even further. Brando could only throw away his sword and stagger forward. At this time, he began to miss the flaming blade and the shallow sea sword. The former could provide him with warmth, and the latter could at least be immune to or at least greatly reduce the damage from the cold. However, he also understood that if this trial didn't restore his strength in the battle with Alkash, he would have turned into a popsicle as soon as he was thrown into this world. So Brando was not in the mood to complain. Of course, in fact, he did not have the strength to complain. He did not know how long he had been walking on the glacier. The world of white wind whistled as if there was no end, and his strength was quietly slipping away bit by bit, just like the temperature that had been gone for a long time. He had a perfect silver body. Although the silver blood of players was not comparable to a demigod, it was at least second to the level of a demigod like the angel Iroma. Legend had it that Tonkas, the son of God, once chased Leviathan at the end of the world for 100 years without rest. In the chaos where the laws collapsed, even the gods had to constantly consume the power of order to maintain the laws of their existence. But even so, no one had heard of Tonkas dying of exhaustion outside the elemental barrier. But Brando felt that he had only walked for a few days and nights in the snowfield, and his strength was on the verge of exhaustion. He began to feel that his vision was narrowing, and the edges of his vision were turning black. His breathing became heavier, and the cold air stung his nasal cavity. The sound of his lungs was like the struggle of a dying man, or a broken bellows performing its last duty. Not to mention that he had perfected his silver-tier body in the game. Even in this world, he rarely felt this way after he had stepped into the gold-tier realm. This was fatigue. For champions with hundreds and thousands of constitution, it was a joke that they would feel tired and tired. In a short period of time, his will and perceptive sense attributes were reduced by nearly 1/10. But the scenery in front of him remained the same. Brando did not know when this journey would end, nor did he know what this damned trial wanted him to do. Perhaps it wanted him to continue walking until he obtained the recognition of the mountains. But who knew what the hell the recognition of the mountains was? He walked for another 2 or 3 days, and the scenery in front of him still did not change. Later on, he was almost numb, and his mind was blank. Originally, he could still feel the loss of his strength, but now, he could only move forward instinctively. Half a month later, Brando's speed began to slow down. Every few steps, he had to stop and rest for a long time. He felt that his eyelids were as heavy as a few thousand pounds, but he instinctively did not dare to close them. He staggered and staggered forward, but he never sat down, let alone collapsed in the snow. This was because Brando knew that once he stopped, he might stay here forever. But his mind was not very clear, and he did not have the time to think about the trial. It was as if his mind was in chaos, and there was only one thought left to support his actions. Live. 1 month, 2 months, and in the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. Even the strength of a sage had finally reached the point of exhaustion. On this day, Brando finally fell heavily into the snow, and the piercing cold and pain woke him up at once. But as he lay in the snow, he realized that he didn't have any strength to get up. He just lay on the ground quietly, staring at the lead-gray sky, allowing the cold to seep into his limbs and bones. He began to lose feeling in his hands, his feet, the area below his knees, and then from his elbows all the way to his shoulders. He lost all feeling. Brando tried to mobilize the power of the law in his body, but the order seemed to have collapsed. His gaze passed through his extreme plane and saw a quiet universe. It was pitch black, without the slightest sign of life, as if there was only endless low temperature and cold. The stars were also extinguished, as if the dust left behind after a star burned out was still suspended in the void. The whole world no longer had a trace of life, and all the laws and order were shattered into pieces, no longer responding to anyone's call. This was the dusk of the gods and the world. Brando suddenly had such a realization in his heart. When a god died, it might see a world like this. He quietly rested his head in the soft snow, and began to feel a trace of warmth, as if his whole body was immersed in warm milk. He did not know if this was an illusion, but he only felt a wave of exhaustion sweeping over him. Brando knew what it meant as long as he closed his eyes. But he was powerless to stop it. There seemed to be a gentle voice in his heart telling him something. That voice told him that he was too tired, and that it was time to let go of everything. But it was at this time that he suddenly felt a trace of strangeness. It was the ground shaking. The snow was shaking slightly. Brando blinked slightly. He almost did not have the strength to make this simple action, but he quickly realized that this was not an illusion of a dying man. The ground was indeed shaking. Furthermore, the tremors quickly became more intense. It was as if a trickling stream had quickly converged into a surging and roaring river, causing the entire ground to shake and churn. Brando took a deep breath, and finally at this moment, he felt his body again, as if there was an inexplicable force bursting out from his body. It came from nowhere and instantly poured into his limbs and bones, like a warm current, instantly pulling him back from the edge of darkness. But Brando's heart was not happy at all. He knew what it was. It was his talent, unyielding. Although his strength and level had returned to before the battle with Alkash, his talent and profession had not changed. He was dead, but the talent of unyielding had brought him back to life temporarily. Now it was the dark magic that drove his body, just like a ghost. And he knew in his heart that if he could not find a solution before all this was over, then this was just a temporary reflection of the setting sun. But Brando did not dwell on this for too long. He hurriedly climbed out of the snow with this force. The shaking ground caused him a lot of trouble, but he finally gritted his teeth and stood up. Although he soon fell to the ground again in the violent tremors, he could finally see what had happened. He saw that on the white horizon, there seemed to be a gust of wind. This was not surprising, because there was always a biting north wind blowing in this place. It was just that it rarely formed a wall like this. Yes, a wall. On the horizon, Brendel saw a white wall that was being pushed forward by the blizzard. After a moment, he recognized what it was. The glacier was moving. It was an avalanche. Chapter 1157. Brando's first reaction was to run to both sides of the valley, but his body had already reached its limit. Every step he took, he felt as if his whole body was falling apart. His speed was less than 1/10 of his usual speed. His indomitable talent only allowed him to prolong his life, but he was far from being able to escape the avalanche that was dozens of miles wide. The earth roared and trembled under his feet, making it impossible for him to stand still. Soon, the roar of the avalanche was behind him. Brando glanced back and saw that the ice wall in the distance, which looked like a line of snow, had turned into a glacier waterfall nearly 100 meters high. The waterfall swallowed everything in its path, mixed with countless sharp rocks. If a person was sucked into the waterfall, their fate would not be much better than being sucked into a meat grinder. But when Brando looked back again, he saw that he was at least a few miles away from the nearest high ground on both sides of the valley. His heart suddenly sank. Am I going to die here? He did not expect that he would not die in the hands of Madara's skeletons, not in the hands of Erwin's rebels, and not in the hands of the Silver Queen, but in a trial. This was the road that the man had walked, the trial of the mountains. The Azure Knight issued a challenge to the mountains. The biting cold wind tore at his face, but he was resolute and unyielding. It was as if nothing could stop him. In the end, he conquered everything and gained the recognition of the mountains. That was a story in myths, a hero in legends. Brando could not help but shake his head helplessly. He was still too far away from the legendary level. It was not that he did not want to, but he could not. The difference in strength was too great. He took a few deep breaths. He could almost feel the chill of the ice chips on his back. Although it was strange, he should not be able to feel the concept of temperature in his undead state. This thought flashed through his mind. Then, he grabbed his cloak and tore it off with force. Then, he threw it away casually. Throwing away the cloak, Brando used all his strength to speed up a few steps and suddenly jumped forward. In front of him was a black rock protruding out of the snow. He rolled and crawled in the snow and firmly grasped the rock. Brando did not intend to give up until the very last moment. Although the chances were slim, the next moment, he felt a heavy blow on his back. Even though he had a silver body, the immense pressure still made it difficult for him to even breathe. With a muffled groan, his vision turned dark, and he almost fainted. Fortunately, his unyielding talent was strong enough to allow him to maintain a trace of clarity in such a situation. Brando could only close his eyes tightly, as if he was in the middle of a stormy sea. His hands tightly gripped the rock, refusing to let the moving glacier take him away. This was because he knew that once he let go, there would be no chance of survival. After several enhancements, the duration of unyielding innate skill was still several times longer than its initial state. However, it was still not too long. If he was buried under a layer of ice that was hundreds of meters deep, he would definitely not be able to save himself before the duration ended. He gritted his teeth and allowed the violent energy to pass by him, but he didn't waver in the slightest. Because he was so focused, he did not even notice that his fingers were inserted into the rock. The loose front part of the icefall was quickly washed away, and the dense back part made up of rocks and broken glaciers followed. After Brando passed the initial period of relaxation, he immediately encountered new trouble. The rocks mixed in the broken ice layer did not care whether he was the king of the earth or not, and he was not. A few rocks the size of a table suddenly hit his back. Normally, such an attack would be like a tickle to a silver body, but here, Brando heard a series of crisp sounds coming from his back, and then a sharp pain swept over him. He immediately understood that it was the sound of his ribs breaking, but before he could let out a scream, a huge force pressed him down on the rock like an ant. Brando did not have any room to resist, and the air was quickly squeezed out of his lungs. If it was not for the fact that he did not need to breathe under the unyielding talent, this would have been enough to take away half of his life. But it was this blow that gave him the hope of survival. Brando quickly realized that the most difficult moment was over. Physical damage was not enough to make the unyielding talent ineffective. No matter how much damage he suffered, he could use the Angel's Heart bottle to recover after this wave of glaciers passed. As mentioned before, although this trial had changed his equipment and status, his backpack and items had not changed. The Thunder God's belt, the Horn of Commendation, and even the floating sphere that Miss Tada had given him were all considered equipment. However, the angel's heart bottle was a genuine item that could be used. It was currently lying safely in his backpack. In fact, if it was not for the fact that the angel's heart bottle could not restore his stamina, he would not have to go through so much trouble. Although he did not feel that the speed of the glacier had decreased, the duration of the unyielding talent was still very long. The speed of the avalanche was too fast, and it would pass by here soon. But what Brando did not expect was that just when he thought that he had escaped disaster, the rock he was leaning against suddenly shook slightly, and then tilted in the direction of the glacier. Brando's heart thumped, and he suddenly fell to the bottom of the valley. He had thought of everything, but he did not expect that the rock he was relying on would be the first to give way. If it was taken away by the glacier, everything would be over. Of course, he could not allow such a thing to happen. He immediately tried his best to mobilize his power of law. He knew that at this time, only the law of space could save him, but what made him despair was that just like before, the elements of space and time seemed to be frozen by the cold of this world, and there was no response to his call at all. After half a year of trekking in this extreme world, he had already exhausted his last trace of stamina and element power. But Brando still had a way. Give up the profession level. Give up the elementalist profession level. He ordered decisively. On his system panel, the elementalist profession level quickly disappeared, and almost instantly, it disappeared from his profession list. Giving up the profession level to gain experience, and then using the experience to convert order points, because this conversion was irreversible, almost no one in the game would do this. But Brando did not have a choice. Even if he knew that the profession level he converted would still be counted on him, and the penalty for his part-time job could never be cancelled or reduced in any way. But at this moment, he had no choice but to do this. The elementalist profession level was burned, but the order points obtained were still not enough for him to mobilize the law of space. Brando made up his mind and cut 5 levels from the Templar Knight. The Templar Knight profession that had been raised to level 50 with great difficulty suddenly fell back to level 45. But this time, he finally obtained enough power. The silver lines of law once again lit up around his body. It was a pity that he could not obtain the order points from this world, otherwise, he would not need to use his element power at all since he had already perfected his body. Brando cursed this damned trial in his heart, and at the same time, he mobilized his law of space to stabilize the rock. His law of space recovered very quickly with the help of order points, and soon it extended to the root of the rock. At this moment, Brando thought that he could almost see hope. But unfortunately, things did not go as he wished. At the last moment when he covered the rock with the law of space, the glacier wrapped in a huge rock hit him from behind. Brando did not have time to react, and his vision turned black. The lines of law that had been stabilized with great difficulty suddenly collapsed. No! He screamed, and felt the whole world spinning. The rock in his hand had already loosened, and then it rolled forward with him. Brando's last thought was that he saw the rock that was the size of a mountain behind him crushing him. In the hills of Anzaruta, Heartwarming was staring dumbfounded at the necklace floating from Medusa's chest. It was a beautiful necklace, made of metal that looked like stars. It shone like a meteor flashing in the night sky. If he remembered correctly, that material should be the mithril that Master Tamar and his teacher had taught him, a rare and expensive metal. But what was really eye-catching about this necklace was not its chain made of mithril, but the pendant. The pendant that emitted a black light was leading the whole necklace to float in the air. "Miss Lismika, what is this?" Heartwarming could not help but ask, "What were you talking about?" But no one answered his question. Lismika and Kaya both stared at the pendant in the air with serious expressions. The latter was still looking at the former, and the former had a struggling look on her face. She finally reached out and tried to grab the pendant. But unexpectedly, Kaya grabbed Lismika's hand. The dark elf girl shook her head firmly at her. "The kingdom will fall, the earth will bear the suffering, the living will suffer in this fire, and there will be no light for eternity, she said to Lasmika in the underground language. No, Lasmika shook her head. This is our treasure. That prophecy can't be true. We can't believe in these illusory things. Kaya, you understand its value. Only by giving it to someone who really understands its value can we get what we want. Don't you want to go back? But Kaya was indifferent. She stared into Lasmika's eyes and said, I am Jokasha's priestess, and I know that the prophecy must be true. Look, Lasmika, the glory of the ancient kings has penetrated the clouds and shone on the earth. A voice is calling the king, but the world turns a blind eye to it. Chapter 1158. Look, Lasmika, the glory of the ancient kings has penetrated the clouds and shone on the earth. A voice is calling the king, but the world turns a blind eye to it. But so what? Lasmika broke free from Kaya's hand and grasped the pendant in the air. We don't even know who that person is. He has everything, but we will lose everything. Greed can blind people, sister. Dusk has come because of the day of final judgment. Dusk is dead, and the demons have fallen into civil strife. Sooner or later, they will return to the chaos, and we must find a strong backer. Only he can let us take back our kingdom. Lasmika's eyes sparkled. The kingdom above the earth is more powerful than you and I imagined. Even the Dragon Queen is no match for the people on the ground. I have found someone who will let us regain the lost glory. Strangely enough, when she held the pendant of the necklace in her hand, the pendant seemed to have completely lost its magic and reappeared as an ordinary necklace pendant, lying quietly in her palm. The dark elf girl glanced at her, shook her head, sighed, and said nothing more. Miss Lasmika. Lasmika looked back with a sense of loss. She saw Heartwarming looking at her cautiously, and her prismatic pupils flashed slightly. She reached out and gently stroked the little prince's head. It's nothing, Heartwarming. This is a matter of our clan. She picked up the pendant in her hand, and the scales on the back of her hand shone in the moonlight. This is the treasure of my clan. Kaya is the priestess of Jokasha and the keeper of this treasure. This treasure is very important to my clan, so I will not let anyone else have it. Heartwarming looked at Kaya, who was not far away, dubiously. The dark elf girl chose to remain silent. Then Miss Lasmika, please put it away quickly. I promise that no one can take it away from you. You are my sisters and my guest. We will protect your safety in Erewhon, he replied. Good boy, Lasmika smiled. No one can take it away from you, but you still have to keep it a secret because it will only bring you and your sister trouble. Do you understand? Heartwarming nodded. It was at this time that a melodious song suddenly came from the distant hills. Heartwarming turned his head curiously in that direction. He had never heard the language in the song. It was neither the song of the mountain people nor the local slang of Anzaruda. What's that? The young prince asked curiously. Golden rain was falling from the sky, and the flames seemed to light up half of the night on the distant horizon. He did not expect someone to be singing at this time. Moreover, this song seemed to have some kind of strange magical power that made people feel a little sad. That's the Lion Man of Tokwinin. Lasmika listened for a moment before looking in that direction and replying. Why are they singing? Heartwarming asked again. What are they singing? But this time, Medusa didn't say anything. Instead, it was Kaya who glanced at the young prince and replied, because thousands of years later, someone else passed the trial of the Chong Mountains, and a king was crowned with the crown that belonged to him. The lion folk of Tokwinin, the dwarves of the mountains, and the people of Jorgandi Ridge are all the people of the land. As she said this, her eyes fell on Lasmika, but the latter did not respond. Instead, she said to her, So what? How were we driven out of our homes and reduced to slaves of the demons? The people of the earth are long dead. Believe in yourself, Kaya, believe in the guidance of Goddess Joksha. The king of the earth is not the only one who has descended. Sister, you know that. Lysimeka's expression changed slightly. In the garden of white roses of the St. Condopa Palace, all the guests in the banquet hall seemed to have forgotten the passage of time at this moment. People looked up like ducks with their necks pinched, their mouths wide open as they stared blankly at Scarlet in the air. The mountain girl held the trembling azure spear in her hand. The dreamy green spear pointed in a certain direction, as if it would fly out of her hand at any moment. Everyone saw that the golden and silver lines of law intertwined with each other, constantly appearing and disappearing in the hall. They gradually formed a mysterious picture around Scarlet. At this moment, the whole hall was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Only Ovina's voice echoed under the dome. Hold me tight, but don't bind the will of the sacred relic. It seems to be saying something to me, Ovina. Scarlet shouted anxiously. Should I respond to it? That's not my voice, but the echo of the mountains. Someone has passed the trial of the Chong Mountains. What does that mean? It means that a king has returned to Wonde and put on his laurel crown, so the sacred sword that belongs to him is about to return. Suddenly, a deafening roar that drowned out the conversation between the two reverberated in the hall. Scarlet felt as if the azure lance in her hand had become 1,000 times more powerful than before, and a vast will had descended upon the lance. A sacred symbol manifested in the hall. Lady Martha. Heavens, that's Lady Martha's sacred emblem. The hall was suddenly thrown into chaos. Ever since the gods left, no one had seen such a scene. Martha's sacred emblem manifested, as if that glorious era had returned to this land. But this scene only lasted for a moment. Everyone saw the spear in Scarlet's hand shoot out a blinding light. It formed a beam of light that shot towards the empty area that Scarlet was pointing at, the empty side corridor of the banquet hall, and hit an arched window there. Then a miracle happened. After the beam of light hit the arched window, it immediately opened a door. The door was a scene that no one had ever seen before, a shallow blue sea and rolling mountains on the horizon. The moment the door opened, the beam of light disappeared. Even the curtains and broken glass near the door were all sucked in. But in the blink of an eye, the door of light began to shrink and finally disappeared. Only Scarlet, who was still holding the azure spear, was left in the hall. She stared blankly at the scene, but after a moment, she acutely felt that something was missing from the azure spear in her hand. She turned around and was about to ask Ovina something. But it was at this moment that the entire Lushta suddenly shook. Almost everyone in the hall lost their footing and fell to the ground. After a moment of silence, someone asked in a panic, "What was that just now?" "An earthquake. Was the kingdom hit again?" But before he finished speaking, the glass of the arched window on the side of the banquet hall suddenly shattered. A gust of wind swept in from outside the white rose garden, and in an instant, all the candles and magic lamps in the hall were extinguished. Before the crowd in the hall could react, they were blown up by the strong wind and hit the wall one after another, and fell down again. The dark hall was suddenly in chaos. Although the nobles still did not understand what had happened, it did not stop them from making the worst guess. The darkness was immediately in chaos. People screamed and rushed in panic to the basement, the room where the long-distance teleportation circle was located. The crowd gathered together and almost washed away everything in their reach. The cries of women and children, the cursing of men, and the shouting of each other mixed together and went straight to the sky. Only a few people in the crowd were able to maintain their composure. Seal, Medisa, and Scarlet were among them. The three of them were different from the other nobles who were panicking, and they reacted almost immediately after the incident. The Shire immediately cast a protective spell on himself, while Medisa and Scarlet went against the flow of people, trying to rush out of the hall to see what had happened. Since Medisa's original position was closer to the front, she was the first to separate from the crowd and come to the promenade. At this time, the wind from the outside didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. The wind passed through the corridor, and the broken curtains of the arched windows fluttered. At a glance, it looked like a group of flying ghosts. When Medisha came to the corridor, she saw a man covered in blood running towards her. As he ran, he shouted at her, "Miss Delphian! Miss Delphian is gone!" The little elven princess was slightly stunned. She quickly held the man and asked, "What did you say?" "The portal just now, Miss Delphian is gone." The man, who was obviously dressed as a royal butler, said incoherently. His face was covered in blood. Medisha just understood what he meant. Before she could ask for more details, the light in the white rose garden dimmed slightly. She looked up and saw something crawling in through the broken arched window. It was a creature made entirely of crystal. It was as tall as 2 to 3 people and took up half of the corridor. It looked a little like a spider with 4 pairs of legs and a distinct head, chest, and abdomen. The head was sharp and thin, and looked like a hook. However, the thick carapace on its body was similar to that of some crustaceans, which made it look a little out of place. However, it was obvious that the creature was up to no good. The moment it saw Medisha, it raised its 2 front legs and a conspicuous red light flashed in its eyes. Crystal Cluster, the little elven princess stared at the creature with a long spear in her hand and squeezed out 2 words from between her teeth. Time seemed to be in a state of stagnation for a long time. Brando once thought that he was dead. He felt that he was in a dark world with no up or down and no left or right. It was as if there was no passage of time and no concept of space. The only thing he could feel was his own thoughts. He couldn't make a sound and couldn't move. He didn't even know how much time had passed. Maybe it was a day, or maybe it was a year, or maybe it was completely stagnant. Due to the lack of reference, he only felt that it was an extremely long period of time. This is the world after death. He couldn't help but think. But soon, he realized that he was wrong. Chapter 1159. In Brando's vision, there were many fragments that emitted colorful lights in the darkness. They were like glass shards scattered in the dark, reflecting light. They were also like mirrors, reflecting different scenes. Some of these scenes were what he had experienced before, and some were unfamiliar to him. These scenes kept appearing and disappearing with the flashing fragments, until a stable door of light appeared in front of him. It was a rather large fragment, but it had the shape of a glowing door. Brendel stared at the door, and the glowing door seemed to lead to another world. It was a courtyard that was intoxicated by a slight breeze. Carved beams and pillars, flowers surrounded it, and light songs were sung. The ivory-white pillars were hidden in the shade of the trees. The scene was emitting a faint light, like a picture scroll of time passing, as if Chang Chunyong was still in a dream. Brando saw rows of armored guards with shining silver scales, holding long halberds, and silver-pointed helmets. They swayed with each other, and pointed ears were exposed behind the bright silver helmet. Their silver hair flowed down the back of the armor like tassels. At this moment, he suddenly heard a voice in his ear. "Why do you always like to peek into the inner world of others? Is the king in the prophecy someone like you?" It was a woman's voice. It was a little hoarse, low and steady, reminiscent of the moonlight whine of the elves. It was mellow and intoxicating. Brando was slightly stunned. He wanted to look around before he realized that he could not move. However, the long period of darkness had sharpened his other senses, and his memory and imagination had become richer. The voice echoed in his mind for a moment, and he recognized its impossible owner, a person who should have died long ago. Bye. He could not speak, but this question automatically popped up in his mind. This is your memory. Aren't you dead? Or am I hallucinating? It's your illusion. This is hell. You're dead, so we can meet again. Bai's voice was still in the mood to joke. It seems that you're not dead. I'm not dead. You're lucky that you can wake up so quickly. I shouldn't have reminded you because it has nothing to do with me anyway. What do you mean? Because if you had told me earlier that you were the one chosen by Martha, you wouldn't have caused me so much trouble back then. You're a complete idiot. Also, I didn't think that the winner would be as useless as you. You almost died in the trial and almost caused me to die with you. You saved me. Brando did not pursue the question of why the other party was still alive. He could roughly guess the answer now. The woman's soul elemental power was quite high, so she was able to separate her soul from her body and store it in his body. This method of existence was very similar to how Saint Hassel the Wind Empress left her soul in the Holy Ring. The only difference was that Saint Hassel did not ask for his permission. It wasn't me. I couldn't save you, but I did wake you up. Did you wake me up? Brando gradually regained his memories. He remembered the broken glaciers and the rocks wrapped in the ice that were falling on him like Mount Tai. He remembered what happened before he lost consciousness. Do you remember now? Seeing that Brando was silent, Bai asked. I remember now. But why am I here? That's why you're lucky that you're not dead. And this is a very strange place. I have a suggestion. We can work together. Brando was silent. He did not believe this woman. Although the Black Knight of Madara did not have any bad records in history, she was still an enemy. But Bai seemed to have guessed his thoughts and said, "You don't believe me. That's okay. I have a way to make you believe me." What way? Don't worry. I'll tell you the content of our cooperation first. I can tell you that there's something here. I must get it. You help me. Also, I want to borrow your angel's heart vase. In return, I'll tell you something. Why do you need my help? Brando asked. Bai did not answer. So you can't move freely, right? Where is your soul hidden? He already got the answer. That's why I hate your cleverness at this time. It's the same at that time. Brando smiled. I'm lodging in your spiritual world. I've been very careful, so you didn't discover me. Knowing that she could no longer hide, Bai's voice was filled with hatred. You actually dare to tell me? Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you? Although Brando already had some guesses, he could not help but be surprised when he heard Bai's words. In everyone's mental world, everyone was their own master. The dream world was only a part of everyone's will, but within it, he could still take whatever he wanted, kill or steal. Not to mention, the mental world of a planeswalker was an independent world that was completely under the control of the planeswalker. If he had known that this Black Knight was hiding in it, he could have turned her into ashes with just a thought. Bai did not explain. In fact, she knew that she had to face such danger if she stood out, but she had no choice. I'm Medish's sister. She said in a low voice. You said that before, Brando also replied in a low voice, but you're an undead, tree herders, and one of the 12 patriarchs. And Desha is one too. Didn't you not kill her? That's because of Mistress White Fog's orders. I don't trust you at all. You should understand this. Brando replied. He was not threatening her. In fact, due to the bad impression he had in the game, he did not want to make any deals with these evil cultists. Although this Black Knight did not have many records of going back on her words, she was cold and heartless. She was also not a trustworthy person. Bai hesitated. She began to worry if she had made the right choice. She knew that her fate was in the hands of Brando, and he could destroy her with just a thought. She was really afraid that Brando was someone who hated the evil cultists. I joined the tree herders for a reason. Brando was slightly startled. What is it? I can't say more. This is all I can tell you. I'm not the same as the people you think I am. I don't care about the lives of others, but I believe that you're not that righteous. Said word by word, this is all I want to say. Other than that, there's nothing else. If you want to kill me, please, is this how you want me to obtain your trust? Brendel did not answer her question, but instead asked a question in return. Not entirely, but it's not impossible. My life is in your hands, so what do you have to worry about? Her calmness made Brendel look at her in a new light. Her calmness made Brendel see her in a new light. No wonder she could become one of the famous 4 Knights of the Apocalypse. Then what did you want to use to gain my trust? He asked again. Don't you want to know where this place is? I can tell you that I can help you leave this place. You don't understand what this place means to you. You'll gain unimaginable benefits, and I just want to get back what I want. It won't help you at all. That's not necessarily true. Maybe what you want is a divine artifact. Intelligence merchants can't earn that much. After all, the ones who bleed are the adventurers and mercenaries, right? Besides, I can't guarantee that what you say is true. I don't care to deliberately deceive anyone. You don't have the right to do so, and there's nothing for you to hesitate about. You have the right to go back on your word at any time. Bai replied calmly. What? This time Brando was really surprised. I don't quite understand what you mean, Miss Tiamas. I've already said it very clearly. The initiative is in your hands. You can choose to believe me or not. You can go back on your word at any time because I need you to help me get that thing. My cooperation with you is based on your reputation. I'm just betting that you won't deceive a weak woman like me and that you will fulfill this agreement. She paused for a moment. So, can I let you get your trust now, Mr. Brando? Brando kept his mouth shut. He had never experienced such generous conditions before. If he really did as she said, even if he got that thing, whether he would give it to her or even kill her after she fulfilled the agreement was actually up to him. Of course, Brando knew that he was not that unscrupulous, but Bai did not know that. Besides, if she really asked for a very important divine artifact or a divine artifact, he would never give it away just because of this agreement. Just like what he said before, intelligence dealers would always make a small profit because they would never be the ones risking their lives. He might give Bai some compensation, but it was her own business whether she wanted it or not. But even so, she still insisted on using this method. Not only did this require generosity, but it also showed that this woman was extremely conceited. She obviously did not doubt her own judgment and choice. But what made Brando could not help but shake his head and smile bitterly was that she was quite accurate. I can only get half of your trust. However, his tone did not reveal any of his thoughts. He only replied, if you're not lying, we can take one step at a time. You're really being overly cautious. Bai said disdainfully. This was indeed being overly cautious. Brando could not think of any reason why she would deceive him, but it was better to be safe than sorry. It was always better to be cautious at this time. He did not comment on Bai's disdain. Anyway, the initiative is up to me. For you, the situation can't be worse, right? He replied. Chapter 1160. Although the atmosphere was neither harmonious nor harmonious, and one of them even had the intention of giving each other a cold shoulder, the two of them had finally reached a preliminary agreement. After the agreement was made, Haku remained silent. Brando could only take the initiative to ask, Miss Tiamas, since we have reached an agreement, you can tell me the details of the cooperation. What is this place? How can I help you? What is it that you want? Haku's answer to this series of questions was very simple, there's no need for that. She paused for a moment before adding, solve your problem first. You have to solve your own problem first before you have the right to talk about what's next. I spent a lot of effort to wake you up. But in fact, I still don't quite understand what kind of state I'm in now, Miss Tiamas. Although Brando had communicated with Haku for a long time, in fact, his situation did not change much. The world around him was still dark, and he still could not feel the passage of time and the existence of space. In fact, he still could not feel the existence of his own body. Before Haku appeared, he could not even confirm whether he was dead or alive. According to the clues in his memory, he should be considered dead. At that time, the duration of the unyielding talent was more than half. He did not know how long he had been unconscious for, but even if it was not long, he should have been buried under the glacier. Although the unyielding talent was almost invincible during the duration, if he did not replenish his lost life before the duration ended, he would still die. Haku said that she did not save him, so Brando could not think of any reason why he would be saved. Unless this place was the same as the game, where he could be resurrected after death. But thinking about it, that would be too ridiculous. I'm not too sure about the state of your body, but the only thing I can be sure of is that you're not dead yet. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here chatting with you. As for your spirit, it should have been heavily injured and fell into a deep slumber. You should be in your own spiritual world right now. As for why it's like this, I'm not too sure. Fortunately, my soul imprint is also in your spiritual world. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for me to wake you up. Haku replied. To be honest, I've never seen such a useless participant like you. I could have used another method to cooperate with you, but I didn't expect you to be so useless. You almost caused me to die with you. Her words were obviously not polite, but Brendel understood that Bai did not need to be polite with him. He only smiled and asked nonchalantly, then what should I do next, Miss Tiamas? Although Haku was dissatisfied with Zhang Heng, he put away his complaints and replied, try to wake up your body and see what's going on outside. You have to find a way to get back to the glacier. I'll find a way to help you. If you're still in good condition, then, how should I wake up my body a try? It's simple. Dream on. Dream? The witches believe that dreams are a process of self-protection for the world of will. Your body will naturally recover after confirming that your spiritual world is fine. This may be a long dream, but it may only take a quarter of an hour for you and me. However, this process is very important. Then what should I do? Do you see those fragments? Haku replied, those are your dreams. It's just that I brought you from a deeper dream to this place. Now, you need to go back and experience a dream until you wake up naturally. Will this process be dangerous? Of course, there's nothing without danger in this world. There's also the danger of choking to death when eating. If your body stops breathing before you wake up, you'll naturally die. Haku replied snappily. Brando suddenly understood. He actually had a guess in his heart. That was, the duration of his unyielding talent might not have ended. He just fell into a state of self-isolation during the duration of his unyielding talent. If that was the case, he had to hurry up because no one knew how long the dream would be, and how short the duration of his unyielding talent would be. Thinking of this, he glanced at the colorful flashing fragments in the dark world and subconsciously sank his mind into one of the fragments. The process of entering the dream was very fast. It was like the process of a person recalling something. It was as if he was already in the dream in an instant. However, the moment Brando sank into the dream, he vaguely heard an angry scream. Damn it, that's my memory, get back here. Then, he did not know anything. It was like a long dream. Brando felt that he had a strange dream. In the dream, he remembered a completely unfamiliar memory. In that memory, he seemed to be a quiet bystander. He saw a glorious empire, an empire that belonged to the elves. He saw a great war, a war between the mortals and the golden race. He saw the end of the war. Blood flowed on the earth. The mortals formed an alliance on the ruins and built a new empire. He saw the long-eared elves make an oath and hide in the forest, never to come out again. Then, there was a grand funeral. The misty rain shrouded the forest. The elves crowded around a hearse full of flowers. In the blooming flowers, there was a small, cold body. According to the age of humans, she was at most 14 or 15 years old. Her flawless skin and face were like white porcelain, but there was no color. She was so pale that it was frightening. Her long eyelashes drooped, and she was wearing a gorgeous silver princess dress. She was lying quietly in a bouquet of lilies. It was Medusa, but she wasn't breathing. She didn't have that faint smile on her face, and she didn't have those eyes filled with wisdom. She was like a doll that had lost its vitality. She was just quietly sleeping. Brando looked at this scene silently. Until he saw Bai in the crowd. Only then did he remember that she was Medusa's sister, the princess of the empire. In his sight, Bai turned around and left the crowd. She changed into a knight's costume, passed through everyone, entered the forest, and never came back. It was a long journey. She went to many places and saw the history of the people of Black Iron rebuilding their cities and civilization after the war ended on the land. Brendel and Haku traveled together. They passed through the wilderness, through the plains, through the mountains and hills, and through the dense forest. They passed through the desert, sailed across the sea on a sailboat, braved the scorching sun in the desert, reflected the stars in the sky, and sprinkled the clear moonlight on the plateau. It was a long journey. Time passed slowly. Finally, there were changes on the land. Settlements reappeared in the desolate wilderness. Merchants and caravans reappeared on the roads. There were more adventurers in the dense forest. Traveling was no longer lonely. Then, Cruz built. Saint Tassol was built. Fanzin was built. Alanto was built. The sages grew old and left the world. He saw the war of mortals, the expansion of the holy cathedral on the land, the knight holding the glorious flag high to expand the borders of civilization, and the expansion and decline of the Black Forest. But Bai's journey did not end. He saw the woman silently searching. She joined the holy cathedral of fire and became a pioneering knight of the Wind Elves. He saw her building a merchant group, becoming the lord of the White City, leading a mercenary group to fight on the land of the 10 cities. He saw her depressed and desperate. She joined All for One and defected. She went through one fierce battle after another and finally died in a deserted forest. The birds sang in the forest, as if weaving a long and eternal dream. He saw her wake up and become an undead, wandering the land. But one day, her journey ended. She met the Dragon Queen and became one of the 12 patriarchs of the tree herders. Then, everything returned to nothingness. The dream seemed to shatter, and the memory turned into countless fragments. Brando heard an angry voice in the darkness questioning him. He struggled to open his eyes and finally saw a familiar scene. It was a glacier. The glacier that spanned several miles appeared to be fragmented. He was lying in a long and narrow crevice formed after the glacier split open. He did not know how deep this crevice was, nor did he know how far it went. Its edges disappeared in all directions as if it would never end. Brando only took a glance to determine that this was directly below the glacier, but he did not know how deep it was. His mind was still in a mess, but the first thing he did was to check his status. The unyielding talent had entered cooldown. Looking at the character status, the buff provided by the unyielding talent had also disappeared. This meant that the unyielding talent had already ended. He was stunned for a moment and immediately opened the character panel. The panel showed that his current status could not be better. Not only was his HP full, but his elemental pool, mana pool, stamina, and the will and perception that had fallen were also fully recovered. The most unbelievable thing was that the profession level of the Templar Knight that he had given up was also back. The disappeared elementalist profession also appeared in the profession column. What's going on? On one hand, Brando felt a splitting headache. This was caused by the long dream. The chaotic memory fragments in his mind seemed to have a war with each other, causing each part of his brain to declare independence. He subconsciously wanted to immediately open his battle record, but at this time, a voice full of anger came from his mind. "You damned peeping Tom." Chapter 1161. Haku's voice seemed to have awakened Brando's memory all of a sudden, turning what he saw and heard in the dream into a trickle, quietly flowing into his thoughts. Brando suddenly woke up. Eternal indestructible, this was the first word that came to his mind. That was the most famous non-existent item in the Amber Sword, and the most typical example of it was the Angel's Tear, which was directly distributed by the system as the key to the player's resurrection. It could not be obtained through any means, it would not be consumed or lost. But it was non-existent to the natives, because even if the player took the initiative to mention this word in front of the natives, the system would directly block the player's speech. But how did Haku know about this thing? "You're looking for the eternal indestructible," he said to the voice in his head. "You know about this thing. You want to resurrect Metasha. Shut up, you shameless. You know about the eternal indestructible?" Haku's voice sounded a little shocked. "Tell me first, where did you learn about this term?" "A dazzling person told me." Haku paused for a moment and replied. "Dazzling people, they still exist. I once met one of them 1,000 years ago. It was a plain traveler. He only stayed in Wone for a short time, and during the conversation with him, I learned about the existence of this thing." Brando remembered the scenes he saw in the dream, and the prejudice in his heart disappeared. "You've been looking for it for 1,000 years. There are very few clues. You're the third person I've met who knows about the existence of this thing." Bai Ling calmed down and replied. The anger in her voice had gradually subsided. The anger came from the anger that came from the privacy of her heart being pried into by others. The first was that dazzling person, the second was a human, and the third was you. "I'm human too." "You're not human. Maybe the blood of black iron flows in your body, but your soul may come from an ancient will. Otherwise there's no way to explain your authority and the knowledge you have. It's just that you don't know," Haku said with certainty. Brando was shocked. He did not expect that his secret would be guessed by this woman, although she was not sure in the end. "What is an ancient will?" He calmed down a little and asked deliberately. "Who knows? That's your own business. If you don't know, don't expect others to answer." "I'm just guessing." Bai's answer was within Brando's expectations. He listened quietly before changing the topic. "Who's the second person you met?" This simple question actually made Bai fall into a strange silence. "He's from Erewhon." "Erewhon's men?" "Yes." "It sounds like you don't want to talk about him." Brendel's sharp senses picked up on something. Even though he saw a lot of memories of Haku in the dream, it was still a dream. Even though it was strange and beautiful, it was not complete. "That has nothing to do with you. The thing you want is the item of eternal indestructibility?" Brando asked. "No. I heard some things from Medusa, and I thought you didn't like her at all." Brendel could tell that Bai was trying to keep him at arm's length, but he still asked. "You're right. Why should I like that little girl? Is it because she's the little princess admired by thousands and the most talented commander of the Allied army?" Bai's voice was full of disdain. Brando could tell that she was not lying. He asked curiously, "Then why did you do all this?" "This has nothing to do with you. Because you were the commander of that battle, right?" Bai did not say a word. Brando was not in the mood to continue this topic. He was not a person who liked to pry into other people's privacy, but he knew that Bai was not just trying to make up for her mistake. She must have wronged more than just Medisha in the past 1,000 years, but when did she care about other people's opinions? It was just that she did not want to admit it, and Brando did not want to force it. He thought of Medisha and could not help but sigh. If she knew what her sister had done for her in the past 1,000 years, she would be very happy. You can't tell Medisha. Wait, you're spying on my thoughts. Brando said angrily. Same to you. Brando immediately found Bai's existence in his spiritual world. He was a planeswalker, so it was easy for him to do this. Then, he isolated her in a corner. Bai snorted, but did not say anything. Brando ignored the woman and opened his battle record. His eyes scanned down line by line, and soon, a special record jumped into his eyes. 732, unyielding buff disappeared. 732, character died. 733, Cypher's heart, lofty mountain language, took effect. 733, 4755 HP gained. 733, 1422 MP gained. 733, 122 MP gained. Brando's gaze froze. Cypher's heart. He muttered to himself. What is this? But someone was more anxious than him. Lofty mountain language. What did you say? Say it again. Brando looked up, frowned and asked, did I say this word? Cypher's heart is the lofty mountain language. How do you know this thing? Bai's voice sounded a little anxious. What is that? Brando asked. Bai did not speak. Brando could not help but frown. Our cooperation is based on mutual trust. I don't want to threaten you, but if you hide everything from me, it will be difficult for me to believe your sincerity, Miss Tiamas. You can back out at any time. You don't have to threaten me, Bai replied. I want to back out now because I didn't get what I wanted from this cooperation. According to the agreement, you have to tell me where this place is and let me find a way to complete the trial, but you didn't do it. Brando did not back down. What does that have to do with this? Of course it has something to do with it. You don't understand my current state, right? I can tell you that I was resurrected because of this thing. Do you think it has nothing to do with the topic we are discussing? Brando replied. Bai's surprised voice seemed to have increased a lot. You were resurrected because of this. How is that possible? You know something, don't you? Brando asked sharply. Let me think. Do you have Cypher's royal bloodline? Brando was stunned, and then shook his head with certainty. The Highland Knights nobility had its own bloodline. They were not even distant relatives of the Erewhon royal family. If it was the Covardo royal family, they might have some relations, but as for the Cypher royal family, it was even more distant. The two families had never even had a marriage alliance. The Cruz royal family of the Cypher royal family was very strong. In the eyes of the Empire's people, they were the noblest branch of the Erewhon royal family. As for the others, they did not even care about the Covardo royal family, if not for the fact that the Covardo royal family had some elven bloodline. Let me see your necklace. Bai suddenly said. What necklace? I'm not wearing a necklace. Brando was stunned. His original necklace was destroyed in the battle with this woman. The remaining necklace was the heart of the sea that he exchanged with the Tremosian, but he had not worn it yet. There was also Miss Tada's floating sphere, but that thing was not a necklace. It was actually a standalone item and did not occupy the equipment slot of the necklace. Impossible, unless you're lying. Wait. Brando also reacted. He suddenly reached his hand into his collar and pulled out a beautiful pendant. He held the necklace in his hand and suspended it in midair. The chain of the necklace emitted a star-like light, but the place where the pendant was supposed to be was empty. This is... Brendel frowned as he recalled the origin of this necklace. This was the necklace that Kiara had given him before she left. That mischievous little Princess Cypher, wasn't she related to the Cypher family that I mentioned? Cypher's heart. He muttered. What does this have to do with the Cypher family? Other than the relic of eternal indestructibility, he had never heard of anything that could bring people back to life. If such a thing really existed, he and his senior sister would definitely look for it to bring the princess and the Valkyrie back to life. Unfortunately, there were no spells or miracles in Wone that could bring the dead back to life. Even holy items like the number 1 holy water and the angel's heart bottle could only bring people back from the brink of death. After all, it was an exaggeration to say that the dead could be brought back to life. If a person's soul had already passed away, then even someone as powerful as Martha could not bring them back to life. This was one of the basic laws of Wone. The only exception was the relic of eternal indestructibility. However, the relic of eternal indestructibility was only effective on players. It could not even appear in this world, nor could it be mentioned by others. It was like an item that did not exist, that was compromised for the sake of the game. In fact, this was the title that the players gave it. However, this treasure that could bring people back to life, even if it was a one-time use item, was enough to overturn this understanding. Its value could not be overstated. It was very likely to be one of a kind. At least, Brando had never heard of an item with a similar effect. Even if it was an artifact or a holy item with a similar effect, it did not exist. The Supreme Queen of the Cruz Empire had died, and people could only let her die. Even Vala and Nydivan, who stood at the peak of mortal strength and power, could not bring out an item similar to the relic of Cypher's heart to bring the Silver Queen back to life. However, the Cypher family had such an item. From Bai's tone, it was obvious that they had more than one. Chapter 1162. As for the origin of House Cypher, everyone knew that it actually came from the Empire. The members of the family were Cruz people, and their bloodline was far superior to the natives of Erewhon. Its origin could be traced back to the ancient times of the Empire. As Miss Tade and Lute said, the ancestor of House Cypher, the ancestor of the late King Eric, might have been the chief knight who followed the Flame King Gretel. This period of history was considered glorious for the small kingdom of Erewhon, but it was also probably the most glorious and the only history worth mentioning for House Cypher. But it didn't count for much. After the War of the Holy Saints, there were countless families formed by the descendants of such heroes on the continent, just like the stars in the sky. Most of them had been buried in the annals of history, leaving no trace behind. Although House Cypher was lucky enough to survive in this period of history, compared to the ancient nobles who truly had a heritage, they actually had no confidence. It was like the nobles of a kingdom and the nobles of the empire could not be compared. In terms of heritage, how could House Cypher compare to the current royal family of Cruz and the royal family of Fanzan? These were the descendants of the two sages, but their descendants could not have a treasure, so how could House Cypher have anything to do with it? The more Brando thought about it, the more suspicious he became. Not to mention House Cypher, even Erewhon would find it difficult to have the strength to keep such a treasure. What kind of secret could this family have? Their biggest secret was nothing more than the era of the War of the Holy Saints, and the history of that era was at most a drop in the ocean compared to the history of Wone. He held up the necklace in his hand and asked a certain soul in his spiritual world, Miss Tiamas, do you know something? How did you get this necklace? Haku asked. A little girl gave it to me. She is the younger sister of the heir of House Cypher, Brando answered truthfully. Little girl. She's a core member of House Cypher. She must know the value of this necklace. She's willing to give it to you. At least she revealed two things. First, she knows that the place you're going to next may be life-threatening. Second, she values you very much. Otherwise, this necklace is as important as her second life. Why would she give it to you so easily? Brando couldn't help but think of the mischievous little princess of the Cypher family. It was hard for him to imagine that such a little girl could have so many ideas. When she gave him this necklace, it was true that they had to go to the imperial capital separately. For an ordinary person, the place he was about to go to was a death trap. Kiara obviously knew what he was going to do, so she gave him this necklace. Brando's heart was heavy. No matter what he thought, he had to accept this favor. At this moment, he thought of House Cypher. He thought of Kiara's brother, the blind eldest prince. He was obviously also a chosen one. He had the ability to rule a country. Unfortunately, this era didn't belong to him. Brando knew that he couldn't betray his thoughts. He couldn't help but have a headache. Why does House Cypher have this thing? What is it? An item of eternal indestructibility? Brando asked. However, Haku didn't seem to notice his absent-mindedness. He continued, an item of eternal indestructibility. Of course not, although they do have some relationship with it. This lofty mountain language came from an item of eternal indestructibility. It's actually a broken fragment. These fragments were made into 6 gemstones, known as Cypher's Heart, and kept by the core members of the Cypher family for generations. Of these 6 diamonds, 3 have already been used, and the whereabouts of 1 are unknown. Right now, other than the one in your hand, there should only be 1 left in the hands of House Cypher. It should be in the hands of the legendary eldest son of the Emperor. Then how did House Cypher get them? Brando asked. You want to know? Haku suddenly asked. It's a very long story. It doesn't matter. Brando thought that she was being perfunctory. He shook his head and replied, we have plenty of time here. Haku paused. She suddenly said faintly, I once knew a man named Erwin. His name was Villefort. He was a branch of House Cypher. During the chaos of Forza, his ancestors broke away from the current House Cypher. His ancestors brought their bloodline to the south to avoid the chaos. They settled down in today's Randner area. He had a wife and a pretty good family. Villefort was a traveler. I got to know him during my travels. After going through a few trials and tribulations together, our relationship became close. Of course, that was a facade I deliberately made. I knew that he was a descendant of House Cypher and had something to do with one of Cypher's hearts. That's why I took the initiative to get to know him. Haku narrated in a low voice, as if she was telling a distant story. In order to gain his trust, I arranged a series of events to make him believe that he was targeted by an evil organization with the purpose of coveting one of House Cypher's inheritances and treasures. In fact, it was House Cypher's heart. Of course, it was inevitable that some people would die, but I didn't care. To me, those people were just ants. After thousands of years, I have long become cold and numb. Of course, this is not a derogatory comment to me. To be exact, I once thought it was a compliment. I hired men, and then killed them in the presence of Villefort, in order to gain his confidence. But I never lied to him, because they were killed by their own greed. Brando frowned. Although he could understand Haku's motives, he could not accept her way of doing things. This woman was even crazier than the Silver Queen, because everything Constance did in the end was under the influence of her own dark side. She had never deliberately pursued coldness and killing. She just chose what she thought was the most efficient way. Compared to her, Melissa's elder sister was a little unreasonable. I don't know if it's because 1,000 years is too long. Loneliness and stubbornness caused her to become like this. But the only thing he was thankful for was that at least this kind of character was not seen in Melisha. Haku did not care about Brando's opinion. She continued, at the end of the plan, I killed his wife, but saved his 2 children. What? Brando almost could not help but exclaim. Why, do you have a problem with my way of doing things? Haku's voice turned cold, and she asked lightly. It's hard not to have a problem. Although he had a favor to ask, Brando did not intend to flatter this woman. Then you can kill me to show your righteousness. I seem to have taken the wrong medicine. His words became a little sharp, and he said tit for tat. Brando shook his head. Although he was not used to it, he did not intend to become a messenger of justice. As long as Haku did not pose a threat to the people around him, he would not kill her. After all, she was Medicia's sister. Humph, hypocrite. Continue. Brando only said. This word made Haku fall silent for a moment, and then she continued, he loved his wife very much. His wife's death was a great blow to him, and during that time, I was always by his side. Later, I replaced his wife's position and became the mother of his 2 children. Brando was stunned. For a moment, he did not know how to evaluate the whole thing, but he finally understood Haku's tone at this moment. He could not help but ask in a gossipy manner, you fell in love with him? Shut up. Bai Ling replied coldly, this has nothing to do with you. What happened after that? After that, I finally found the opportunity to ask him about the heart of cipher he had, and I also got the answer I wanted from him. He loved me very much, just like how he loved his deceased wife. So when I found his necklace by accident, he didn't hide anything from me when I asked him about it. He told me everything about the necklace. According to him, the heart of cipher came from a place called Osopal, which is neither in Cruz nor in Erewhon. In fact, whether it really exists in Wonde is doubtful. Osopal actually means does not exist in the ancient language, and the heart of cipher came from there. They are one of the common fragments of an eternal object. These fragments were divided into 2, and one of them was made into 6 diamonds, called the Lofty Mountain Language, or the Heart of Cipher. These 6 diamonds were actually brought out by 2 men. For some reason, they came into the hands of the Flame King Gretel, who then passed them to the ancestors of the House of Cipher, who brought them to Erewhon. They were brought to Erewhon. You should have some understanding of this land called the Land of Miracles. These 6 diamonds are obviously closely related to the whereabouts and ownership of the Flaming Blade. They are all to ensure that the inheritance of this holy sword is not lost. Haku replied. Actually, I seem to have heard of this person, Villefort. Brando suddenly said. What? But I have a few questions, Miss Tiamas. What happened between you and him in the end? Did you take the heart of cipher with you? And you said that the fragment of the eternal object was divided into 2, so where did the remaining part go? Brando did not expect that his question would lead to such a long silence. After a long while, Haku finally replied quietly, yes, sir. After I gave birth to 2 daughters for him, I killed him because I knew I had to leave. But I spared him and his deceased wife's children, and left the heart of cipher to his descendants. Brando had expected this answer, but he was still a little surprised. You didn't take the heart of cipher with you. I'm looking for the true eternal object, but the heart of cipher isn't. Although it's precious, it's not worth mentioning in my eyes. I've already gotten what I want, so I don't care about these things. The clue of the eternal object is related to the other half of the fragments, right? Chapter 1163. Haku nodded and revealed the answer to the riddle. Cipher's heart was originally a fragment of the artifact of eternity, but these fragments were split into 2. One of them was used to create these 6 gemstones, while the other half was lost. The lost fragments retained their original form, which was why they were still connected to the artifact of eternity to this day. Those fragments may reveal a secret. As long as I find them, they can lead me to Osapa, the legendary place. I believe that the relic of eternity is here, and I spent countless time confirming its existence little by little. After nearly 1,000 years of searching, I finally got the answer I wanted from the man Villefort. Haku ended his description with this paragraph. Brando sat on the shattered glacier. Cypher's heart had restored him to his original state, so his current condition was far better than when he was trekking in the snowfield. He could confirm that he was still in the trial world, but there was no biting cold wind under the glacier. Although the temperature was still very low, he was not in a hurry at the moment. He stood up and said to Haku, "Then let's go, Miss Tiamas." Haku stopped. "You haven't told me where this place is, and how do I get out of here and complete this trial?" Brando asked again. "This is the tile latch. You are walking the path once taken by the Knight of the Azure. This is the trial of the Chong Mountains. Of course, it is not as simple as it appears on the surface. At the end of these mountains, there is an altar, and the azure lance was once inserted on that altar. The tile latch. Is it related to the tile latch of Wonde? Many of the names of Wonde come from myths, but it is also possible that the mountains did appear in Wonde a long time ago, just like the throne of Himalud." Haku replied. "So we have to find the altar." "Naturally. Then what do I have to do?" "First, you have to go back to the ground." "Can't we just follow this glacier?" Brando asked as he surveyed his surroundings. Although the space under the glacier was narrow, it was far less dangerous than walking on the glacier. The memory of the biting cold wind that could erode one's will was still fresh in his mind. Bai sneered. "Where do you think this place is? There are memories of nothingness under this glacier. Mortals will eventually lose themselves if they walk in here. You've been to the deadly frost forest, so you must have seen those nameless people. Is it that dangerous?" "It's just hearsay. If you don't believe me, you can try. Maybe there's another way out under the glacier." Brando could hear the sarcasm in Haku's tone, but he didn't intend to give it a try. He knew how dangerous it was to be in a place full of unknowns. Mortals didn't know much about this world. Anyone who looked down on it wouldn't have a good ending. He raised his head and looked up. Under the broken glacier, the ice layer was crisscrossed with cracks. Light and shadow shone through the layers of ice, making the whole underground a complicated maze. It was easier said than done to get back to the surface. Headache? Bai could naturally see that he was in trouble. "What can you do, Miss Tiamas? The problem is still with you. That little fairy told you what to do, but since you came here, you've forgotten other people's advice. To be honest, I've never seen a chosen as incompetent as you." Bai scorned. Being ridiculed like that, Brando was naturally annoyed. However, he knew that he couldn't argue with this woman at this time. Besides, what she said was definitely not nonsense. He tried to calm himself down and recalled what Lute said. "You mean here or within the range of the mountain of ceasing storms? Otherwise, where do you think it is? You're leading ABs into a warm little nest." Probably because he didn't expect much from Brando's comprehension, Bai continued, "The Chong Mountain test is a test of willpower. Of course, it's not as easy here as in the mountain of ceasing storms. Whether it's the illusory ancient memories and whispers under the glacier, or the icy wind above the glacier that can freeze thoughts, they will all obstruct your thoughts. Unless your willpower is strong enough, you won't be able to get out of this glacier even if you walk for a lifetime. Do you think that the Knight of Azure spent 40 years here to travel and enjoy the scenery here? He honed his willpower in the icy wind, so he finally got the recognition of the mountains and found the only way to leave this place." Brando suddenly realized and couldn't help but feel ashamed of his ignorance. Since he transmigrated here from the Amber Sword, he had been relying too much on his understanding of the game. Once he encountered something that he didn't understand, he couldn't help but be at a loss. Come to think of it, Bai was right. With Lute's hint, he could have thought of a solution early on. But his performance now was worse than in the game. As a player in the upper middle class, he couldn't rely on his performance to stand up. Brendel was slightly alarmed. He had relied too much on his experience in the game, and had actually lost the most basic sense of vigilance and sensitivity to his surroundings. This was what he relied on the most in the game, and it was also one of the basic qualities of an expert player. Fortunately, his battle instincts were still there, and his skills had not returned. In fact, he had improved a lot in this world. Otherwise, with his current vigilance, it would have been difficult for him to survive the battle with Lushta. Realizing that there was a problem, Brando quickly adjusted his attitude. He looked at the ice wall above his head and focused. As soon as he focused his attention, he immediately felt the difference in the world under the glacier. In the darkness that was originally empty below, there were some strange whispers echoing. These tiny voices seemed to drill into his mind from every pore. Brando was even sure that ordinary people wouldn't be able to help even if they covered their ears because these whispers appeared directly in their hearts. He immediately understood that these were the ancient memories and whispers that lurked in the darkness that Bai was talking about. He couldn't help but take a deep look in that direction. Although these whispers could only be heard by concentrating, if a mortal stayed down here for too long, they would inevitably be unconsciously influenced and eventually be tempted to fall into depravity. They would completely lose themselves and become the nameless people he saw in the deadly frost forest. Fortunately, Bai reminded him. Otherwise, if he wasn't vigilant, he might not have been willing to go back to the glacier. He might have unknowingly fallen into the trap. After thinking about this, the woman's mockery didn't sound so harsh. It was obvious that at least in terms of cooperation, she didn't hold back. Of course, this could also be because Bai didn't want to die together with him. Brando looked up, and the crisscrossing world under the glacier became clear in his eyes. Although it wasn't as exaggerated as when Himelad's throne came directly in front of him in the stormy mountains, a clear path appeared in front of him at this moment. Not only him, even Bai couldn't help but praise when he saw this scene. No wonder they chose you. Although you are a little stupid, your will is rare. I'm afraid that even the Knight of the Azure Sky would be ashamed of his inferiority. Now I understand why you could wander aimlessly in the glacier for half a year without being blown to pieces by the Everwinter ice wind. In the ice wind, your strength and understanding of the laws are meaningless. Only your willpower can protect you from harm. Although you don't realize it, your willpower is too tough. It can protect you for such a long time even when you're unconscious. Bai's tone was full of incredulity. This is really unheard of. In theory, the toughness of a person's will is inseparable from the maturity of his mind. An idiot may not necessarily have a strong will. This can't be faked. Miss Tiamas, although I am far less scheming than you, I don't need to be described as such, right? Brando couldn't bear the lady's poisonous tongue and replied. I can't compare to your little princess. At most, I can be regarded as an ordinary person. You can't even compare to me. What do you think you are if not an idiot? Brando was speechless. After a long while, he asked, You mean Medisha? Of course, otherwise why do you think she is called the most talented commander of the Allied forces? She is the darling of the humans and elves. You must think that she is a gentle, elegant, and very easy to get along with princess, right? In fact, everyone thinks so, because she is the same to everyone. However, the number of unlucky people who have died in her hands is much more than the number of people who have died in your hands. Bai was full of disdain. When your little princess sent her enemies in the court to guard the borders, your grandfather's grandfather's grandfather wasn't even born yet. But to be honest, I really like her in her current state. The last time in ABs was probably the only time in my life that I could teach her a lesson. If it wasn't because of this, do you think I would have given you the chance to act last time? When Bai talked about her sister, she was almost a completely different person from when she was recalling her past. Hearing this, Brando was shocked. However, he knew that this woman's one-sided words couldn't be fully believed. Perhaps Medisha had some tricks up her sleeve. After all, she was the commander of an army, not a simple and ignorant little girl. However, compared to her somewhat deranged sister, the former was obviously more trustworthy. At least this silver elf princess had never had any ill intentions towards her own people. Brando didn't respond to Bai's words. In fact, he had made up his mind to not offend either side. He wanted to get out of this strange glacier first. Who knew what was under the darkness? Although it was said that there were illusory ancient memories, these wandering memory fragments never existed alone, just like the dream of Hattie in the loop of trade winds. Chapter 1164. After making up his mind to ignore Haku, Brando grabbed the broken protrusions under the ice and carefully climbed up. Because he did not know how deep he had been swept into the ground by the avalanche, he did not know how long it would take him to see the surface. But after passing through a few sharp ice peaks, he suddenly remembered what Haku had said about the shards. He recalled what he had seen and heard in Haku's dream, and suddenly asked, "So, after that, you joined All for One for the other half of the shards?" "What?" "I mean the fragments of the other half of Cypher's heart. After you left Villefort, you should have been looking for them." Haku was silent. Brando understood her concern and replied, "Actually, you don't have to worry about it. I have no interest in the relic of eternity, but I am curious if such a thing really exists in this world. If you really don't want to say it, we can end this topic." "That's not necessary." Haku's voice sounded faintly. "I did join All for One for the sake of finding the fragments. After I left Villefort, I was looking for them. Later, by chance, I learned that All for One was also looking for these fragments. All for One is also looking for these fragments." Brando could not help but interrupt her. "Of course, I have my own methods and sources of information, which have almost never been wrong for nearly 1,000 years. It was through this method that I learned about the existence of Cypher's heart and found the Villefort family." When talking about her methods, Haku's voice sounded calm and confident. "But how can you be sure that they are not interested in Cypher's heart itself? Or are they interested in the relic of eternity?" "Because before I confirmed this information, decades ago in the north of Erewhon, they had used the Book of Mavacart to summon demons to destroy a duchy. At that time, this matter caused a shock throughout the continent. And when I traveled around the Silver Bay after leaving Villefort, I happened to be involved in the investigation because I was looking for the whereabouts of the Book of Mavacart. During the investigation, I found that the whole thing is not as simple as it seems. There are many suspicious points. So I tried to look up a lot of documents about this incident at the time. In these records, there were many places where it was mentioned that the members of All for One were obviously looking for a certain matter at the time. Unfortunately, these obvious clues were ignored by the Holy Sanctum's chroniclers." Bai's voice was filled with disdain. "I followed the clue and found out that they were looking for a fragment without much effort. At that time, I had just learned the truth about the fragment of the eternal indestructible item, so I naturally linked the two things together." "So you sneaked into All for One because of this? Did they find the fragment?" "I've experienced a lot of things in All for One. It took me about 15 years to get to the middle and upper levels of the organization, and there's no hope for me to go any higher. Although I have had plenty of time over the past 1,000 years, that is not the problem. This organization is far more organized than tree herders. I will not waste my time, so I have decided to take the risk." "What did you do?" "I spent 3 years waiting, and another year preparing for this. Finally, I bribed an internal member to give me the opportunity to get close to the fragment. I knew that my chances of survival were not great, so I prepared the ritual of turning into the undead in advance. Later on, it proved that this matter was correct. In the process of escaping from All for One, I was seriously injured and relied on turning myself into the undead to escape. Moreover, All for One does not accept undead, so I could only escape to Madara to have a chance of survival. That happened about 30 years ago, and I lived in seclusion in Madara for 25 years to avoid the eyes of all for one. At that time, I got the fragment from them and took away a part of the Book of Mavacart. Bai's tone was flat, as if he was describing something that had nothing to do with him. Brando was secretly amazed. All for One was active in Wound and had penetrated deeply into the world of order. Although their plans did not always succeed, it was rare to hear that they suffered losses. Bai not only infiltrated the organization, but also successfully mixed into the middle and upper levels. In terms of results alone, it was brilliant. There was no need to elaborate on what the Book of Mavacart meant to All for One. It took them so much effort to find the fragment that was related to the Relic of Eternity, so it was not something that could be casually discarded. This woman was calm and scheming, but when it was time to act, she was ruthless enough. If it was not for her paranoid style, Brando could not help but admire her. But at this time, he was more concerned about whether he was asking a tiger for its skin by cooperating with her. Bai seemed to have the ability to see through people's minds. She said contemptuously, "Why, are you afraid?" "A little. No one wants to provoke a madman, let alone a madman with ability and means. I am no exception." Brando replied. "I'll take it as a compliment. I'll accept it." Brando could only be speechless about some of the words and deeds of this woman. "What about the fragment? If I remember correctly, you did not have it with you at that time, right?" Brando suddenly remembered the situation of his battle with this woman in East Metz. He could not help but feel a little lucky. Fortunately, he had the advantage of understanding history at that time. Otherwise, he really did not know how he would have died. "Of course I can't have it with me. All for One has not forgotten me. I know very well how those people do things. They are more vengeful than you think. Including you, you should be on their blacklist now. Don't forget how many times you have ruined their good deeds." Bai Ling laughed and said, "That time in the deadly frost forest, the trouble you caused them was no less than the impact I caused when I stole the Book of Mavacart and the fragment. I advise you to pay more attention to your territory. Who knows when they will give you a big gift." Brando frowned. He also knew a lot about All for One. Obviously, he understood that what Bai said might be true. However, he was also a little helpless about this matter. He could only counter soldiers with arms and water with an earth weir. In other words, this was called not worrying when there were too many debts. He had offended too many forces along the way. All for One, tree herders, the Empire, Madara. As for the small characters like the royal faction and the northern nobles, they could now be ignored. Now, there was another world boss, the Twilight Dragon. Compared to this one, the others were nothing. "You left the fragment in Madara?" he asked casually. "You're asking too many questions," Bai replied mercilessly. "Sorry, I just mentioned it casually." Brando replied, "But I'm a little curious. Last time in East Metz, although you were nominally working for the Supreme One with the Mercury Staff, in fact, your identity as the Patriarch of Tree Herders is more important. I'm curious about why you joined Tree Herders after that. Is it the same reason as All for One?" "Humph, clever." Bai Ling replied coldly, "But this time, you guessed right. The reason I sneaked into Tree Herders was to find the fragment. I suspect that the Dragon Queen may have a fragment in her hands, but the time was too short, and I didn't have time to confirm it. I originally planned to spend the next few decades to confirm this matter, but I didn't expect to be disrupted by you. Damn it, you can't blame me for this. You were the one who made the first move." Brando's meaning was very simple. Bai Ling asked for it. "That's not what I'm angry about." Bai snorted softly. "I'm angry that I actually failed in your hands and ruined my reputation. Especially after that, your behavior was so unsightly. If you dare to reveal this experience in the future, I'll fight you to the death." Brando was speechless, especially when he thought about why this woman had been searching outside for the past 1,000 years. He felt that her last sentence might not be just a threat. For a paranoid person, her behavior could not be judged by common sense. Oh right. I suddenly reacted. I suddenly remembered something. You still owe me something. What did you say? Brando was stunned. He originally thought that this woman was just paranoid, but at least she was reasonable. He did not expect her to slap him in the face in the blink of an eye. He couldn't figure out how he could owe her anything. Back then, when she perished with him, he didn't get any spoils of war. If she wanted to put her losses on him, it would be too ridiculous. Moreover, if that was the case, it wouldn't just be one thing. If I'm not wrong, you should still owe me a fragment. Brando's hand slipped and he almost fell down from the crack of the glacier. Fortunately, he had the strength in the game now. After sliding down a few dozen feet, he forcefully inserted his hand into the glacier to stop the downward trend. Then he said angrily, "I don't think this joke is funny at all, Miss Tiamas. This is not a joke. Let me ask you, did you save a little girl at Fathom Port?" I did not care about his words and asked seriously. Brando was stunned and then nodded. Yes. That was the daughter of the flower leaf caller. Her name is, I'm not interested in her name, I interrupted him. At that time, she was escorted by a team of Imperial Knights. There was a noble among them. What was his name? Rodney, he's Veronica's younger brother. Brendel remembered this person clearly because of Veronica's relationship with him. I don't care whose brother he is. You. Brando was suddenly speechless. He began to feel that it was a very painful thing to talk to this unreasonable woman. This person is one of my men, I said. You should have locked them up, right? Did you search their bodies and get a fragment from them? Of course not, Brando replied subconsciously. At that time, the war was imminent. He did not have the time to collect some strange fragments. Moreover, he did not even know the existence of this thing at that time. But just as he spoke, he could not help but freeze. I noticed his tone and could not help but gloat. What's wrong? Can't say anything. Brando was not in the mood to pay attention to her. Because he suddenly remembered that there seemed to be such a thing at that time, and it almost caused a big trouble. But that thing, he did not only have one fragment. Chapter 1165. Did you really get it? Haku asked. Seeing Brando's strange expression, she had a 70 to 80% guess in her heart. That shard is the main reason I'm heading to the Kurlutz Empire's eastern Metz region, or else the black orb alone wouldn't be enough to make me move. I'm not safe anywhere outside of Madara, the spies of the Unifying Guild are everywhere. After confirming this, the woman's voice calmed down and explained. After listening to her words, Brando understood. He grasped the crack of the glacier firmly and climbed back to his previous position. At the same time, he calmed himself down from the previous shock. It had to be said that under the stimulation of this woman, he seemed to have regained the sharpness that originally belonged to the game. After carefully analyzing the pros and cons, he asked, "You want to get this fragment from me?" Haku hurriedly said, "No, it's an exchange. I can pay you a satisfactory price. Anyway, you are not interested in the Relic of Eternity." But now Brando's thoughts had changed. He shook his head and said, "It's impossible for anyone not to be interested in the Relic of Eternity. I only said this before because I'm different from you, Miss Tiamas. You can take away things that don't belong to you by any means, but I can't, because I don't think there's anything more important in this world than upholding principles. And in fact, I want to remind you that the Relic of Eternity doesn't belong to you, and it hasn't been engraved with a person's name." Haku closed her mouth. Of course, she thought this was a kind of bargaining, because it was her own nature. You mean to say that you want me to raise the price? It doesn't matter, I don't care. You can ask for anything you want. These words made Brando raise his eyebrows. He really couldn't stand this woman's logic and finally couldn't help but mock. Then give you to me. A chill rose from Brando's back. You're playing with fire. Haku's voice suddenly became a few degrees colder. That's impossible. I'm the princess of the empire, not Lei Feng. Other than that, that's why, don't make promises that you can't keep. Besides, what you said before is not quite the same as what you are saying now. I have not forgotten poor M. de Villefort, and perhaps you would have considered his feelings before making your statement? Damn it, shut up. Bai was infuriated. I don't want to talk about this. If you want to make a deal with me, don't try to provoke me. Don't think that I have to get that fragment from you. But Brando didn't care about this threat at all. He calmly replied, that's exactly what I wanted to say, Miss Tiamas. There was a long period of silence between the two of them. Brando was overjoyed when he saw an ice crevice that was wide enough for one person to pass through. Climbing in such a place was much easier than climbing on a glacier. He subconsciously increased his speed. Not long after he sped up, a bright light appeared above the ice crevice. The light shone down from the ice, forming a long, magnificent tunnel that stretched for about a few miles. Seeing this, Brando knew that they were very close to the ground. The light could only come from the ice sheet, which meant that the ice was quite thin in this place. But Hao Ren's silence finally made Haku unable to hold on. What's your condition? She had to take the initiative to speak. Her voice was a little hoarse, as if it was not coming from the same person. She seemed to be suffering. Thousands of years of searching for the relic of eternity had almost become an obsession for her, and this idea even made her a little paranoid and crazy. Of course, Bai Leng said coldly, except for that one condition. Which one? Brando sneered. You know, you bastard. Brando shook his head, knowing that he had finally taken back the initiative. It was not difficult, and it was not because he was smarter than Haku, but because he knew that he had the absolute initiative in this conversation. Haku could not do anything to him, and even needed his help. If she could not take the lead in the conversation, then he would be a failure. Previously, he did not argue with Haku because she was Medish's sister, but the main reason was that there was no conflict of interest between the two of them. But now, it was different. Brando knew very well that if he could not take the initiative in the next conversation, some of his ideas could not be realized. As for the fragments, he was also determined to get them. You still don't quite understand what I mean, Miss Tiamas. He took the initiative to remind Haku, I'm telling you this not because I want to insult you, but because I want to tell you that our positions in this transaction are equal. Of course, I have more resources, and it's you who want to get something from me. I can choose not to accept your proposal, so don't take everything for granted. He continued, you are Medish's sister, the princess of the Silver Elves, but unfortunately, you are a human. Your identity does not have any binding force on me, so in terms of position, we are also equal, do you understand? Haku was silent, but Brando knew that her silence was actually a tacit agreement. However, he did not take the initiative to speak, but instead, he sped up and climbed to the surface. The bottom of the glacier was getting brighter, and the surrounding ice layer had changed from the previous blue to the current light blue, and was gradually evolving into a colorless and transparent direction. After a while, Haku's voice sounded again, and she still asked in a hoarse voice, what do you want? Although the question was almost exactly the same as before, the meaning behind it was completely different. This Silver Elf Queen was no idiot. Her several hundred years of experience had proven this point. Perhaps she was a little stubborn, but she definitely wasn't stupid. She knew that Brando was not talking to her about principles and equality, but about his own conditions. These words only meant one thing, and that was that if she wanted to get that thing, she had to follow his wishes. Her question was actually already a compromise. Brando nodded. Let's talk about the fragments again. You said that Tumen brought them out from a place called Osopal, he asked. Is this a legend, or is it true? It is true. You heard it from Villefort. Do you have any other evidence to prove it? When I was hiding in All for One, I found some information that can confirm this. Tumen had been to this place before, but as to whether it was by chance or because of Odin's instructions, I don't know. Brando was silent, and although the speed of his hands and feet did not slow down at all, and he was still climbing rapidly to the surface, he had already believed Haku's words in his heart. In history, there was a place called Osopal in the wilderness of the Four Territories, where the Myurnas, the Silver Folk, and the humans had a great battle, and Tumen was said to have died in that battle. The place where Osopal used to be was the area of today's Land of Dusk, but like the final battlefield, people could no longer find the ancient battlefield. Such things were not uncommon in Wonde. Many places in Wonde were between the physical world and the world of laws, such as Himalud's throne and the Latch of Wa where they were now. They themselves were a kind of law, or the manifestation of God's kingdom on the ground, and may never appear again for some reason. However, Brando remembered that Tumen had once given him a treasure map, and that treasure map was buried deep in his mind, and he could only vaguely remember some details. Tumen had said that when his strength reached a certain level, he would be able to understand what was described on the treasure map, but now that he was already a supreme existence, he still knew little about the treasure map. When Braggs was sorting out the relics of Ondina's father, he had obtained a hand-drawn map from the relics and letters left behind by him. At that time, he found that the map was similar to the treasure map left by Tumen in his memory, and the ciphertext on the map was marked with the name Osopal. These clues happened to coincide with what Haku had said. When Haku mentioned Villefort before, Brando felt that the name was somewhat familiar. He vaguely remembered that when Ondina was talking about her family, she had mentioned this name, and it seemed that he was from the generation of her grandfather's father. And Ondina did indeed move from Ranner to Braggs when her father's generation fell. Of course, although it could be a coincidence or someone with the same name, after all, the name Villefort was considered common in Erewhon, and it was not a rare or uncommon name. But the name Villefort was closely related to Cypher's heart, the relic of eternal indestructibility, and the name Osopal. It was obviously not a coincidence that such a map was found in Ondina's father's relics. Besides, Brando also remembered another thing. When he found Borg Nessen's corpse in the Forbidden Orchard, one of the fragments was found next to the corpse. All the evidence pointed to one truth, and that was that Villefort was very likely Ondina's ancestor. One of the children of Haku's deceased wife was Ondina's grandfather. Ondina was a descendant of the Cypher royal family. A possibility that made Brando feel a little cold flashed through his mind. He suddenly remembered why the necklace that Chiara gave him looked so familiar. Chapter 1166. Did you really get it? Haku asked. Seeing Brando's strange expression, she had a 70 to 80% guess in her heart. That fragment is my main purpose for going to the East Mets of the Cruz Empire. Otherwise, the black orb alone would not be enough to make me move. I'm not safe outside of Madara. All for One spies are everywhere. After confirming this, the woman's voice calmed down and explained. After listening to her words, Brando understood. He grasped the crack of the glacier firmly and climbed back to his previous position. At the same time, he calmed himself down from the previous shock. It had to be said that under the stimulation of this woman, he seemed to have regained the sharpness that originally belonged to the game. After carefully analyzing the pros and cons, he asked, "You want to get this fragment from me?" Haku hurriedly said, "No, it's an exchange. I can pay you a satisfactory price. Anyway, you are not interested in the Relic of Eternity." But now Brando's thoughts had changed. He shook his head and said, "It's impossible for anyone not to be interested in the relic of eternity. I only said this before because I'm different from you, Miss Tiamas. You can take away things that don't belong to you by any means, but I can't, because I don't think there's anything more important in this world than upholding principles. And in fact, I want to remind you that the relic of eternity doesn't belong to you, and it hasn't been engraved with a person's name." Haku closed her mouth. Of course, she thought this was a kind of bargaining, because it was her own nature. "You mean to say that you want me to raise the price?" "It doesn't matter, I don't care. You can ask for anything you want." These words made Brando raise his eyebrows. He really couldn't stand this woman's logic and finally couldn't help but mock. "Then give you to me." A chill rose from Brando's back. "You're playing with fire." Haku's voice suddenly became a few degrees colder. "That's impossible. I'm the princess of the empire, not Lei Feng. Other than that, that's why, don't make promises that you can't keep. Besides, what you said before is not quite the same as what you are saying now. I have not forgotten poor M. de Villefort, and perhaps you would have considered his feelings before making your statement?" "Damn it, shut up." Bai was infuriated. "I don't want to talk about this. If you want to make a deal with me, don't try to provoke me. Don't think that I have to get that fragment from you." But Brando didn't care about this threat at all. He calmly replied, "That's exactly what I wanted to say, Miss Tiamas." What followed was a long period of silence between the two. Brando was overjoyed when he saw an ice crevice in front of him that could only fit one person at a time. Climbing in this place was much easier than climbing on a glacier. He subconsciously increased the speed of his ascent. Not long after he sped up, a bright band of light appeared above the ice crevice. The light shone down from the ice, forming a long, magnificent tunnel that stretched for about a few miles. Seeing this, Brando knew that they were very close to the ground. The light could only come from the ice sheet, which meant that the ice was quite thin in this place. But his silence finally made Haku unable to hold on any longer. "What's your condition?" She had to take the initiative to speak. Her voice was a little hoarse, as if it was not coming from the same person. She seemed to be suffering. Thousands of years of searching for the relic of eternity had almost become an obsession for her, and this idea even made her a little paranoid and crazy. "Of course," Bai Leng said coldly, "except for that condition." "Which one?" Brando sneered. "You know, you bastard." Brando shook his head, knowing that he had finally taken back the initiative. It was not difficult, and it was not because he was smarter than Haku, but because he knew that he had the absolute initiative in this conversation. Haku could not do anything to him, and even needed his help. If she still could not take the lead in the conversation, then he would be a failure. Previously, he did not argue with Haku because she was Medish's sister, but the main reason was that there was no conflict of interest between the two of them. But now, it was different. Brando knew very well that if he could not take the initiative in the next conversation, then some of his ideas could not be realized. As for those fragments, he was also determined to get them. "You still don't quite understand what I mean, Miss Tiamas." He took the initiative to remind Haku, "I'm telling you this not because I want to insult you, but because I want to tell you that our positions in this transaction are equal. Of course, I have more resources, and it's you who want to get something from me. I can choose not to accept your proposal, so don't take everything for granted." He continued, "You are Medish's sister, the princess of the Silver Elves, but unfortunately, you are a human. Your identity does not have any binding force on me, so in terms of position, we are also equal, do you understand?" Haku was silent, but Brando knew that her silence was actually a tacit agreement. But he did not take the initiative to speak, and instead, he sped up and climbed to the surface. The bottom of the glacier was getting brighter, and the surrounding ice had turned from a faint blue to a light blue, and was gradually evolving into a colorless and transparent direction. After a while, Haku's voice sounded again, and she still asked with a somewhat hoarse voice, "What do you want?" Although the question was almost exactly the same as before, the meaning behind it was completely different. This silver elf queen was no idiot. Her several hundred years of experience had proven this point. Perhaps she was a little stubborn, but she definitely wasn't stupid. She understood that Brando was not talking to her about principles and equality, but about his own conditions. These words only meant one thing, and that was that if she wanted to get that thing, she had to follow his wishes. Her question was actually a kind of compromise. Brando nodded. "Let's talk about those fragments again. You said that Tumen brought them out from a place called Osopal," he asked. "Is this a legend, or is it true?" "It is true. You heard it from Villefort. Do you have any other evidence to prove it?" "When I was hiding in All for One, I found some information that can confirm this. Tumen had been to this place before, and as for whether it was by chance or because of Odin's instructions, I don't know." Brando fell silent, and although the speed of his hands and feet did not slow down at all, and he was still climbing rapidly to the surface, he had already believed Haku's words in his heart. In history, there was a place called Osopal in the wilderness of the Four Territories, where the Myurnas, the Silver Folk, and the humans had a great battle, and Tumen was said to have died in that battle. The place where Osopal used to be was the area of today's Land of Dusk, but like the final battlefield, people could no longer find the ancient battlefield. This kind of thing was not uncommon in Wonde. Many places in Wonde were between the physical world and the world of laws, such as Himelad's throne and the Latch of Wa where they were now. They were a kind of law in themselves, or the manifestation of the kingdom of God on the ground, and may not appear again for some reason. However, Brando remembered that Tumen had once given him a treasure map, and that treasure map was buried deep in his mind, and he could only vaguely remember some details. Tumen said that when his strength reached a certain level, he would be able to understand the things described on the treasure map, but now that he was a supreme being, he still had a smattering of understanding of the treasure map. When Braggs was sorting out the relics of Amandina's father, he had obtained a hand-drawn map from the relics and letters left behind by him. At that time, he found that the map was similar to the treasure map left by Tumen in his memory, and the ciphertext on the map was marked with the name Osopal. These clues happened to coincide with what Haku had said. When Haku mentioned Villefort before, Brando felt that the name was somewhat familiar. He vaguely remembered that when Amandina was talking about her family, she had mentioned this name, and it seemed that he was from the generation of her grandfather's father. Amandina did indeed move from Randner to Braggs when her father's generation fell. Of course, although it could be a coincidence or someone with the same name, after all, the name Villefort was considered common in Erewhon, and it was not a rare or uncommon name. However, the name Villefort was closely related to Cypher's heart, the relic of eternity, and the name Osopal. It was obviously not a coincidence that such a map was found in Amandina's father's relics. Besides, Brando also remembered another thing. When he found Borg Nessen's corpse in the Forbidden Orchard, one of the fragments was found next to the corpse. All the evidence pointed to the truth, and that was that Villefort was very likely Amandina's ancestor. One of the children of Haku's deceased wife was Amandina's grandfather. Amandina was a descendant of the Cypher royal family. Brando felt a chill run down his spine, and he suddenly remembered why the necklace that Chiara gave him looked so familiar. Chapter 1167. He had seen the same necklace on Amandina's body, but there was no pendant on the necklace. Amandina said that it was a relic left behind by her father. During the Battle of Ampere Seal, Amandina unexpectedly came back from the dead. He had thought that he was hallucinating, but now that he thought about it, everything was clear now. Brando was speechless for a moment. "Count Brendel, the lady beside you," Terst's words from the night in Amandina's old house still rang in his ears. He remembered that when he first met Amandina, the bandits that he and Badam took care of claimed that Amandina's father owed them money. Amandina denied it at that time. Brando knew her better than anyone. Amandina would never lie, so there was something fishy behind this matter. Now that I think about it, Thirst is a member of All for One. If Amandina is a descendant of Cypher's royal family and has Cypher's heart on her, and she might be related to the fragment of the eternal relic, then the reason why All for One is looking for trouble with a poor noble's daughter is obvious. But Amandina obviously knows about the power of Cypher's heart. Otherwise, she wouldn't have lied to me after the Battle of Ampere Seal. How much does she know about her bloodline? Why didn't she tell us about it? He thought that he knew Amandina well, but now he wasn't sure. Why are you spacing out? Haku was getting impatient when Brando was spacing out. She realized that she wasn't afraid of Brando's threats. Instead, she was worried that he wouldn't say anything because she couldn't guess what he was thinking. Brando stopped. He had already climbed to the top of the ice cliff. There was a narrow crack above his head, and he could see the gloomy sky from above. The ground was almost within reach. He took a deep breath and continued forward while holding on to the cold wall. He answered Haku's question, "Do you know what kind of place Osopal is, Lady Tiamas?" "How would I know? I've been to the wilderness of 4 territories and was almost discovered by the spies of All for One. But that place used to be called Osopal is now just a small hill. There's nothing there." "Then I have a suggestion." Brando said, "You want the relic of eternity, but I'm interested in this place. If you can gather all the fragments, I'll go with you." "Don't." Haku replied very vigilantly, "You're pushing your luck. I want the relic of eternity, and I won't allow any unstable factors." I said, "The relic of eternity doesn't belong to anyone for the time being. Don't treat it as something that belongs to you. If I don't agree, you'll never get it." Brando didn't care about Haku's rejection and replied coldly, "But if you agree, you can at least bet that I'm really not interested in the relic of eternity. Aren't you doing that now? You're not even afraid that your life is in my hands, so why would you be afraid that I'll break my promise?" Haku was silent. She actually understood that Brando's words made sense, but it was a difficult choice for her. She was a person with a strong desire for control. She could easily give up her own life, just like how she didn't care about the lives of others. But she had a strong sense of purpose, and she would not allow the plan to develop in a direction that she couldn't control. Brando pretended to be indifferent, although he was very curious about the gift that Tumen left for him. Besides, there might be more important secrets behind this treasure, whether it was the origin of Amandina or the abnormality caused by the gray stone pieces in Fathom Harbor. He still couldn't forget the scene at that time. It was clearly the will of the Twilight Dragon that descended from outside the elemental barrier. How could a fragment that could alarm an existence of this level be taken lightly? However, he didn't show this attitude. He only walked along the small radial path between the glaciers. Soon, bright light filled his vision, causing him to almost squint his eyes. His vision was filled with white glaciers and snowy plains. This was almost a nightmare to him before, but after experiencing the darkness of the underground, he felt somewhat familiar with it now. At this time, Haku finally spoke, "Then you have to do your part. How do I do my part?" Brando asked as he looked around. "In addition to the Dragon Queen, and 1 fragment in your hand, there should be 4 more fragments. Among the remaining 4 fragments, we will each take 2 and investigate separately. You have to use your power. You are a noble of Erewhon, a close vassal of the Regent Princess, and also helped Cruz's eldest son to seize the throne. You already have a lot of power in the mortal world. I believe you can give me a satisfactory answer." Brendel did not comment on Haku's condition. He thought for a while and changed the question. "I have one last question. Is this the shard you're talking about?" As he spoke, he took out the gray stone piece from the floating celestial sphere. It was about the size of a palm. It was a gray, flat stone piece that looked like a chisel. There were no traces of artificial carvings on its surface, as if it was naturally peeled off from a huge rock. But at this moment, this stone piece was covered with all kinds of runes and secret runes, as if it was wrapped in all kinds of seals. It lay quietly on Brando's hand, and no aura could be felt from it. "Clumsy seal," Haku said disdainfully, "this is the fragment you found from the night." She wanted to say a few more words because the stone should have belonged to her. She had spent a lot of effort to find it and secretly took it from the hands of its original owner, but she did not expect it to fall into Brendel's hands because of her negligence. However, as soon as she opened her mouth, she was stunned, and all the words she wanted to say were stuck in her stomach. Because she saw Brando take out another similar fragment. "Do you think this is the same?" Brando asked, "or is it a counterfeit?" In fact, he already knew the answer in his heart. These fragments were most likely real. Otherwise, they would not have been able to trigger the mutation at Fat Tan Port. But for safety reasons, he still wanted to confirm it. "How did you get this thing?" Haku was so surprised that she almost cried out, "Where did you get it?" "I understand now. That little girl, I should have known that she was the descendant of that bitch. Villefort, that bastard, really hid something from me." Brando heard the indignation and anger in her voice and could not help but shake his head. He thought to himself, "You killed them all. Who is the one who should blame whom?" And Villefort might not have been hiding something, because he suspected that Amandina's father was involved in this series of events because he was investigating what happened to his grandfather. He just did not know how his grandfather, who appeared and disappeared mysteriously, was connected to this place called Osopio. Amandina once said that her father had been collecting stone pieces when he was alive. At that time, he also left some of these stone pieces among the relics he left for Amandina. They were very different from the fragments mentioned by Haku, but they were similar in some ways. At least in terms of appearance, they were very similar. Unfortunately, when he checked the stone pieces at that time, he found that they were just some very ordinary sandstone pieces, so he gave them to Amandina for safekeeping. He did not have them with him at the moment, otherwise he could have taken them to Haku to check. Maybe there would be some clues. Borg Nesson obviously knew some of the secrets of his family. He had been searching for relevant information for a long time. Although his goal was not to obtain the Relic of Eternity, but to find another secret, it was a pity that when he finally found the fragment of the real Relic of Eternity, he had reached the end of his life. "If I didn't have the memories and experience from my previous life, I'm afraid the secrets of my body would have been lost in the long river of history." He was still thinking about this problem when he heard Haku continue to ask nervously, "How many fragments do you have? Are you lying to me? You knew this secret long ago." "No, Brando shook his head and said, "You can rest assured that I did not know this secret until now. But how many fragments I have has nothing to do with you. You just have to fulfill your obligations, and our cooperation is still valid. I want the Relic of Eternity." Haku replied, gnashing his teeth. "That's yours. I can give you this promise." Only then did Haku shut his mouth. Brando ignored him. He looked up and tried to find a path in the snowfield, but it was at this time that both of them saw an invisible ripple spreading in the gloomy sky. Then, a rumbling sound came from the horizon. It was as if thunder was rolling from the distant horizon. "What is that?" Brando asked. "That's a sign that the space somewhere is becoming unstable." Haku's voice was slightly uneasy. "The avalanche earlier should be caused by it. There might be some changes in the wind elemental plane outside. I suggest you speed up because I don't know if this change is good or bad." Brando did not reply, but he felt that it might not be that simple. He had a faint premonition that the change might not be in the wind elemental plane, but in the entire elemental barrier. P.S. Yesterday when I was writing the title of the chapter, I subconsciously wrote 70 after 60. Ha ha ha, that's not a big deal, and there's nothing wrong with my mathematics. Actually, thinking about it carefully, it's all Dian Nyang's fault because Dian Nyang did not let me change the title of the chapter. Yes, that must be it. Chapter 1168. At this moment, very few people could hear the roar coming from inside the elemental world. The temple suddenly shook violently, and the little fairy lute fell to the ground. The back of his head hit the base of the 12th obsidian pillar. He groaned and saw stars. Who's messing with me? He didn't care about the big bump on the back of his head. He rolled on the ground and pulled out the sword of flame with a backhand. But the solemn hall was still empty. The obsidian floor was bright enough to reflect one's reflection. It was dark in front of him, and only dust was floating in the air. The 14 pillars seemed to be supporting the sky. The trapezoidal roof of the temple was hundreds of meters above the ground. It was engraved with the 4 main elements of air, fire, water, and earth. Who's there? Lute shouted again, but the Blessed of Fords was annoyed to find that no one seemed to be against him. There was no doubt that he had fallen on the ground earlier. Who's there? Who's there? Who's there? The empty echoes echoed in the depths of the pitch-black hall. His 2 delicate flame-like eyebrows couldn't help but wrinkle together. He muttered doubtfully, "Strange, why is the Temple of Elements resonating? Could it be that I'm having an illusion?" Lute pursed his lips and looked around again. Then he got up and put away the sword of flame. He continued to walk into the depths of the temple vigilantly. The Temple of Elements was the cornerstone of this world. How could it be so easily shaken? He just thought that he had hallucinated, or that there was something in the dark temple playing tricks on him. Some ancient consciousnesses like to stay in this kind of empty sanctum. It might be a lingering memory of the past, or it might be a ghost that had lost itself. But apart from being fond of pranks, most of them did not do any harm. But the little prince of the fire fairy still felt a little uneasy. He thought that if he had known, he would have gone back when Brando disappeared and looked for Malurche and the fox. He thought that although these miscellaneous people couldn't help much, they could at least give him courage. This thought flashed through his mind, and he quickly abandoned it. "I don't need anyone to give me courage," he muttered to himself. Brando had been missing for more than an hour, but Lute was not worried. He knew that Brando must be passing the Chongshan tournament, and he had no doubt that Brando would succeed. Because he was the one chosen by the will of the golden flame, the one blessed by the flaming blade. "I'll try to get to Himalud's holy temple before Mr. Brand comes out and help him pave the way. I want to see how many holy swords the flame blade's adorer can get. No matter what, I will be the only one in 1,000 years who is fortunate enough to witness this scene." Lute muttered as he looked around. The holy sanctum, which was immersed in darkness, was unfamiliar to him. After all, it was his first time stepping on the shiny obsidian bricks of the holy sanctum. On the other hand, they were also very familiar with it, because it was engraved in the memories of every subject of Forsyth. This was the holy sanctum of Storm, a sanctum built on the foundation of the wind elemental plane. Its master had long been gone in this era, and its believers had not set foot on this pilgrimage for thousands of years. But this did not prevent the sanctity and inviolability of the holy sanctum in the hearts of the elementals. But this was not the peak of Himalud's throne. Lute understood that the peak of the mountains was where the coronation was. If Brando passed the trial, he would definitely appear there. But not everyone could pass through the holy sanctum of Storm to reach the peak of the throne. As Lute walked, he searched for the deepest knowledge and memories buried in the fairy bloodline. Soon, he stopped and his eyes lit up. Here it is, on the smooth floor in front of him. Bright silver metal was poured into the grooves on the obsidian floor, drawing a huge magic circle. The fire fairy little prince did not hesitate to fly to one of the runes. The rune seemed to be injected with some kind of magic, and in an instant, it lit up in the darkness. "The next one is the rune of flame," he read aloud, ready to fly up and jump on the rune. But it was at this time that something strange suddenly happened. But it turned out that everything he had encountered before was not an illusion. The second wave of resonance came a few minutes later as scheduled. At that time, Lute had just gained a foothold on the second rune. Suddenly, the whole holy sanctum trembled, as if a power that mortals were destined to look up to shrouded the entire holy sanctum of Himmelud. The fire fairy little prince only felt that the stone pillars and the vault around him were shaking, making a creaking sound that made one's teeth ache. The holy sanctum seemed to collapse at any time. Fortunately, he had expected it, so he was not thrown to the ground a second time. But this time, Lute was finally convinced that it was not the holy sanctum of elements, but the whole Himmelud's throne that was shaking. Crack, crack. In Lute's eyes, the side walls and pillars of the holy sanctum cracked, and the cracks spread like a spider web from the walls in an instant. The sand and mud on the vault above his head rustled on the ground. The holy sanctum of elements is going to collapse. Lute's eyes widened, and an unlikely possibility flashed through his mind. But how could this be possible? The holy sanctum of storms was the cornerstone of the mountain where the storms stopped. Even if the entire elemental barrier collapsed completely, the holy sanctum would still stand. He shook his head, and just as he was about to throw the absurd idea out of his mind, he happened to see an obsidian pillar suddenly break in the middle. It fell down with a roar, and the pillar fell from mid-air and hit the ground heavily. After a cracking sound, the bricks on the ground stood up like pieces of paper, forming a fist-like crack. Lute was stunned for a moment, and even the cracks on the ground extended to his feet without him noticing. The cornerstone of the elemental world was shaking. There was only one voice in his mind that echoed over and over again. At the foot of Himmelud's throne. White Mist, Andesha, Malurcha, and Fayez, who was on his back, watched as the majestic mountain began to crumble from the foot of the mountain. The sacred path to the heavens formed by tens of thousands of stone steps was falling apart, turning into countless stones that fell into the void. In fact, it was not just the holy sanctum. The entire elemental world was collapsing in front of them. What a terrifying picture it was. The mountains and rivers were broken, revealing the dust world that was empty below the mountain where the storm stopped. Some of the broken mountains were sinking, rolling into the endless void with countless gravel, while some of the mountains were rising, floating above everyone's heads. The entire world seemed to have lost its distinction of up, down, left, and right in an instant. The blue sky disappeared and was replaced by a gray space that surrounded the world. The entire wind elemental plane was torn apart, whirling and flying in all directions. The fragment that they were on happened to be one of the larger rock fragments in the mountains. It was connected to the holy sanctum of Himmelud, and together with the collapsing holy sanctum, it flew to another mountain range not far away. Facing this terrifying scene, the unprepared people were completely stunned. White Mist was still fine and could still maintain her calm, but Fayez was already screaming and jumping on Malurcha's back. Help! It's the end of the world. Oh my God! Lady Martha must have abandoned us. The little fairy kept screaming. Until White Mist covered her mouth with her claws, then raised her head and said to Malurcha, "The foundation of the elemental world has been shaken. Someone is extracting its power. I think it's most likely the Dragon Queen. She's a madwoman who wants to destroy our world." Whoa! The little fairy stared at her with wide eyes. "Then what should we do, Lady White Mist?" Malurcha had already experienced life and death once, so he appeared much calmer. He only turned his head and asked. Wait. Yes, stay calm. Our only chance is to wait. Right now, Brando is the only variable in the entire plan. We can only wait for him to pass the trial and come out. White Mist answered calmly. Whoa whoa. Fias protested. Unfortunately, no one recognized her. Malurcha frowned and answered, perhaps Miss Tata and the sage have other plans. If the Lord encounters any trouble in the trial, should we inform them? No, they can't help us. White Mist shook her head. Once the elemental barrier collapses, our world will be directly exposed to the chaos. We can't do anything. The only thing we can do is pray. As she spoke, she suddenly felt something. She turned around and saw Andesh's figure disappear behind a broken rock. White Mist was stunned, then shook her head gently. At this time, she couldn't care less about what the other party wanted to do. A huge whirlpool appeared above the shallow sea. When it first formed, the whirlpool swept across the sea of fog and the sea of bones. When its spiral arms swept across the White Cape, it crushed the most spectacular and iconic scene in the shallow sea. The final doomsday seemed to have descended upon this world. Countless natives of the shallow sea fled from their homes in all kinds of boats. Their goal was the inner sea of the shallow sea. From there, they would pass through the inner elemental barrier and enter the world of Wound. But not everyone could be so lucky. More and more ships were swept into the whirlpool and could no longer escape. The whirlpool above the shallow sea expanded by 1,000 times in an instant. It quickly formed a huge storm that spanned across the entire water elemental plane. Dark clouds began to cover the entire shallow sea. Dazzling lightning crisscrossed above the sea. On average, there were dozens of lightning bolts between the clouds every few seconds. A flare flickered on the surface of the sea, as if the scene before the end of the world. But it also symbolized the end of a world. The water fairies looked at this scene in panic. Chapter 1169. From then on, no one sang in the storm. It was like a scene described in an elven poem. Even the fairies, who had always been carefree, finally fell into a dead silence. Bright spots of light appeared on the surface of the sea, but it was not the light of the birth of life, but the light of destruction. No one sang anymore. The fairies silently watched their home struggle under the final doom. But it was to no avail. The entire shallow sea was being swallowed up by the huge vortex that almost filled the entire field of vision and was being dragged into the abyss bit by bit. The shallow sea would become history after this day. Everyone understood this. People turned their eyes to Miss Tautatalamus Thumb, the protector of the frozen sea. After the elven lord left this world, the true master of the shallow sea. Tata did not say a word. Such a scene of despair was reflected in her eyes. Her pale fingers gripped the side of the ship so tightly that they almost sank into the wood. Miss Tilias. The elder of the mist spoke with a heavy tone. No need to say any more, teacher. I understand. But before he could speak, Tata had already refused. She turned around and shook her head at her teacher. Then she turned her gaze to the short and fat Termosian behind her. Elder Cap, Lord Sage. I'll leave the ship to you, Lord. Tata shook her head at him, indicating that he did not need to speak. If you see Mr. Brando next time, please give him the Leaf Crown's bloodline on my behalf. Elder Captain paused for a moment before nodding solemnly. Thank you, she spoke softly. Miss Lismika, Miss Kaya, what do you think that is? In the hills of Anzaruta, Haruz suddenly pointed to the sky and shouted. When the last golden raindrop hit the ground, the sky suddenly darkened. There was no longer any starlight or moonlight in the pitch-black night sky. It was so dark that it was like a curtain. This darkness enveloped the entire world. Even the burning flames in the wilderness seemed to have dimmed. At first, people could still see a ray of golden light in the sky, but in the end, even this last ray of light dissipated, leaving only endless darkness and depth on the earth. The singing of the lion folk stopped. The chirping of the nightingale and the flapping of the insects' wings also disappeared. The nearby forest and the distant hills could no longer be seen. In front of him was a pitch-black darkness. The entire world seemed to have sunk into a boundless silence. Then, a dazzling light bloomed in the sky. It was a silver net-like object. It first flashed in the sky of Vaunt, then disintegrated into each other, like the intense light that burst forth when a new star was born, and then shattered into countless silver spots of light, falling like a silver meteor shower. This spectacular scene was reflected in the eyes of everyone who was on the hill at this moment. Its solemn and stirring beauty shocked everyone present. That's... Lismika almost trembled when she saw this scene. Tiamat Law. Kaya's voice was both indifferent and awed. The first level of the magic network has collapsed. The cornerstone of the world of elements has been shaken, war. It has descended, specks of light fell from the sky. Haruz saw that the dark sky suddenly caved in slightly, and then a bright door of light opened in it. Then, his eyes reflected countless shining ships, all kinds of ships, with colorful streams of light, escaped from the door of light. Like countless insects scrambling to escape from their homes, some of these ships turned into flames in midair and disappeared completely after a dazzling flash. Some fell straight to the ground and turned into fireballs. Some of them were lucky enough to escape, and they fled in all directions in panic. "What is that?" he asked blankly. "The inhabitants of the shallow sea," Kaya replied calmly as she looked at this scene. "The shallow sea has disappeared." Lismika suddenly clenched the necklace in her hand. Her palms were sweaty, and she was a little frightened for a moment. She wondered if she had made the right choice. The inhabitants of the shallow sea could still escape, but what if one day Wonde also disappeared? Then where could the people of Martha escape to? She did not speak. Haruz could not make the slightest sound. The dark elf girl just watched quietly and did not seem to intend to comment. Suddenly, a brighter flash lit up in the distant sky. It came from the Cloak Bay, the Sea of Stars, Nine Phoenix, and the border of the Lubic Kingdom. These flashes were slightly different from the flashes of the collapse of the Tiamat Law. They were more dazzling, but obviously more fragmented. Like the light of fireflies. Little by little, they gradually lit up. The floating city of the Bugas, this time, Haruz finally recognized it. Naoki slowly fell to the ground amidst the bright flames. The lines of law that kept it moving became more dazzling than the sun, but after a short moment of dazzling light, they completely shattered into pieces and dissipated in the air. The city of silver finally could no longer maintain its pride. It burned, and flames emerged from all parts of the city. Finally, in a terrible roar like the wail of a giant beast, the city fell apart in midair, turned into a burning fireball, and fell into the dark sea. 1,500 silver descendants, noble sorcerers, and their descendants witnessed this tragic scene from the reefs of Silver Cove. The last pride of the Silver Folk, the last glory left behind by the era of the gods, finally came to an end after 1,000 years. The weave at the bottom of the Tiamat Law had collapsed, and the elemental world was no more. The Silver Folk could no longer indulge in their dream of ruling the sky. Why? Someone's angry roar came from the wind. Are we responsible for the ignorance of the mortals? The leader of the Silver Folk. The supreme of the 12 wizard leaders, Solomon stood in the wind and rain in his robe. His silver robe had long been soaked by the rain, and he silently watched the last light on the sea. It was the last embers of an era. But it was extinguished in the end. The sound of the wind came from the sea, and a black shadow suddenly appeared in that direction. It was countless dragons flapping their wings. They raised their heads, swayed their huge bodies, and flew in one direction. These noble creatures did not stop for a moment because of Naaka's fall. Their eyes only briefly swept across the land, and then quickly crossed the strait and flew in one direction. All the silver folk watched this scene in silence. They slowly turned their heads and looked in that direction as the dragons flew across the sky. It was the other end of St. Osol, the hinterland of the Cruz Empire, the wilderness of the Four Territories. Only Solomon lowered his head and looked at his palm. The rain drenched his pale palms, and the veins that were supposed to be silver had now dimmed. He used his fingernail to cut a hole in his finger. Bright red blood blended into the rainy night. The law disappeared. Magic also disappeared with the wind. 17. TGSTR The silver folk were lost on the land, walking forward in the darkness and ignorance. Kacha, the end of the silver shuttle-like spear was shaking up and down due to the excessive force. Looking forward along the streamlined body of the spear, the shuttle-shaped spear blade was piercing through the chest of a strange crystal creature. Through the web-like cracks, the crystal creature was nailed to the wall on one side of the arcade. The huge crystal cluster struggled for a moment, and the red light in its eyes finally dimmed. It lowered its head and stopped moving. Medusa's expression did not change as she watched this scene. The blood of the silver elves flowed with their memories of martial arts and battle experience, as if it was engraved in the depths of every cell. At the very least, very few people would be able to tell from the outside that this seemingly weak elven princess could burst forth with such powerful battle strength from within her frail body. At least the palace butler was stunned. He sat there in a daze, his face covered in blood. It was as if he had seen the most unbelievable scene. In the previous fight, that extremely terrifying monster was actually nailed to the wall with only one move. Medusha stood still for a few seconds, then walked over, reached out to grab the end of the spear, and pulled out her spear bit by bit. The crystal cluster's body slid down from the wall. But the moment it landed, the red light in its eyes suddenly burst out. Two sickle-like arms sprang out like springs, stabbing at Medusha from left and right. The speed was shockingly fast. "Be careful," the butler shouted nervously. But the spear in Medusha's hand was faster than his voice. The moment the crystal cluster that pretended to be dead counterattacked, it found that the tip of Medusha's spear was already pointed at its chin. If it had a little wisdom, it should know that the other party was waiting there. Unfortunately, it didn't. So what greeted it was a crisp cracking sound. The spear pierced through its lower jaw, and the crystal shards fell one after another. Then, the blade of the spear pierced through its brain and central nervous system, cutting its spine in half, and then pierced out of its skull. A ray of bright silver light was revealed. The crystal cluster raised its head unnaturally, and its head was pierced by Medusha's spear. It twitched, and its movements came to an abrupt stop. The two sickles stopped less than 2 centimeters away from the silver elven princess's face. Medusha tilted her head. P.S. A book friend came, went out to eat and came back very late to write. Fortunately, I finished writing, drunk. Also, it's the 22nd, begging for some monthly votes. Friends, for the sake of the party and the country, give Brother Bear a hand. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.